Should I start?
Yes,
Should I? Should I, Patty?
yes. On to you, Dada.
Any problem?
Start. Yes, sir. Please start.
Good afternoon
To all of you, the participants, wherever you are.
and we are a bit late because of inclement weather that was here. And we are on the penultimate day, day 3 of the international webinar captioned United by Pains, Divided by Pens, Perspectives on Partition Literature. And the day first and day two, we had some wonderful professors from various parts of this world. And today, in our webinar, we have got some wonderful professors and academicians as well. And today, the first speaker would be Dr. Nugba Taj Langa, and she is an associate professor of English, Department of English, Common Christian College University, Lahore, Pakistan. So it's a privilege to have her here on our podium today. You look at her. Hello. Yeah, I'm back. So I was telling that in our first presentation today, we have got Dr. Nugba Taj Langer. She is an associate professor of English, Department of English, Common Christian College University, Lahore, Pakistan. So before and should be giving a lecture today on film, media, and representation in post-colonial South Asia, post-partition development. So that is going to be a very, very interesting and engaging sort of lecture. You can guess it from the topic itself: film, media, and representation in post-colonial South Asia, post-partition development. Regarding Nugba Taj Langer, uh, she is serving as Associate Professor of English at Common Christian College University since 2009 to date. Her research interests include South Asian identities, resistance literature, peripheral literary voices from Pakistan, South Asian cinema, post 911 literature. She is a freelance translator, political activist, and a feminist. She did her postdoc from Le Centre d'Etudes de Indie et Asia du Sud Paris 2016 and 17 and was a Charles Wallace Fellow in 2018 in School of Oriental and African Studies, London. Her academic publications include a monograph, Poetry as Resistance, Islam and Ethnicity in Post-Colonial Pakistan, that was published from Rowlatt's 2011, an edited volume named Literary and Non-Literary Responses Towards 9/11, South Asia and Beyond. That was also published from Rowlatt's 2011, and a number of research papers based on Iraqi identity, marginalization of women, poetic resistance. She has also published poetry translations with Poetry Translation Centre, London. She is currently a project partner lead from Common Christian College University in Global Challenges Research Fund (GRCF) for a pilot advancing female literacy and empowerment in Pakistan and India through life writing with University of Sheffield, United Kingdom. Her upcoming co-edited volumes include Film, Media and Representation in Post-Colonial South Asia, and literary developments in post-colonial South Asia. These are all forthcoming publications by Rowland. So we are very glad to have Professor Nugba Taj Langer in our podium. Madam, please over to you now.
Dr. Sen, I couldn't hear a word what you said, but I assume, I'm expected to present now.
Okay, ma'am, it's over to you. So your topic that I have told before the, on
Sorry, I
the
can't hear
film
you.
media. Okay, you can't hear me, ma'am.
I can barely hear you.
Can you hear me right now, ma'am?
Yeah, but
Hello?
very light. The sound is really, really low.
Low. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, ma'am. Excuse me.
I can't hear you at all. I can't hear you now.
Right now, can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I have to shift my position. Whatever, whatever. Let me once again tell that we are extremely delighted to have Professor Nubba Langer in our podium today. She'll be talking about old media and representation in post-colonial South Asia, post-partition developments. And she is presently working as an associate professor of English, Department of English, Forman Christian College, University, Lahore, Pakistan. So it's over to you, madam, right now, because we have lost some of the precious moments, from you. So over to you, over to Professor Nubda Raj Langa. It's all
Thank
yours,
you so
madam.
much. Thank you so much, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm, uh, I want to begin by particularly thanking your institution, Netaji Subhas Mahavidyalaya, and your Vice Chancellor, who provided me this opportunity to join this forum, and the organizers, Dr. Sen, Mrs. Verma, and Dr. Nayak, who organized this webinar. So I'm going to start because we've already lost some time, and I'm going to try and share the screen somehow. I tried it last night, but I'm sure it works this time. Can you
Excellent
see?
screen sharing.
Can you see my screen?
Screen sharing. Yes,
Can you see my screen?
yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. It is perfect.
So I'm going to start this presentation, which was titled basically after a research project that I'm working on with my colleague, Professor Roshni Sen-Gupta, who spoke yesterday. And it's a book, and the title is Media and Representation in Post-Colonial South Asia. We've jointly co-edited it, and I think the unique part about this project is that for the first time, although I was studying with a lot of Indian friends, but for the first time we've collaborated on this research project, and this is going to be inshallah out this year within next 2-3 months. So basically, my focus today is on presenting you this upcoming research project, plus some ongoing contemplations in research on partition. And by these contemplations, I mean that these my own contemplations, and the kind of approach that I think we should take as post-colonialists and as students of partition. So a lot of research that I've been conducting so far in relation to post-colonial studies is based on my international interactions and with Indian academic circles within India, Pakistan, and abroad. But and this book is an example of it. But I have to admit that somehow these interactions have been limited, particularly with South Asian colleagues from India and Bangladesh, and hence we've used the diasporic space as an intellectually charged space of resistance. Now this is something I learned from Nagugi's theoretical approaches in pen points and gun points, where he's talking about how cultures of resistance create in a politically charged context, how they create spaces of resistance, and they find ways of expression, whether it's through performing arts, whether through its literature, or whether it's through academic discourses. So the other thing that I want to indicate is that partition literature, I'm not sure if it's true in case of, definitely don't think it's true in case of India, but in Pakistan, when we mention or teach partition literature, we are mostly talking about India and Pakistan, and we are talking about 1947. And hence 1971, the partition in 1971 is kind of a neglected field. We don't have enough history materials, or we don't have access to them, or the generation who was collecting these materials has died or vanished or migrated. So I think it's a big dilemma, and in this respect, I feel that this webinar is an important development in terms of once again initiating that dialogue. Now, before moving on to discuss our joint research project, I want to mention three key writers who are always remembered with reference to partition. And the first of them is Saadat Hasan Manto, of course, everyone knows him. And I'm just going to mention the quotes because Saadat's work is so diverse. It's so difficult to kind of discuss it in this limited time. But um, it's quite a renowned quote where he says कि हिंदुस्तान आजाद हो गया था, पाकिस्तान आलम वजूद में आते ही आजाद हो गया था, लेकिन इंसान दोनों मुमलिकतों में गुलाम था, तासुब का गुलाम, मजहबी जुनून का गुलाम, हैवानियत और बर्बरियत का गुलाम. And this can be translated as Hindustan had become free. Pakistan had become independent soon after its inception, but man was still slave in both countries. Slave of prejudice, slave of religious fanaticism, slave of barbarity and inhumanity. Now I'll come back to why I mentioned this quote in a moment. But first, I want to move on to another quote by Joginder Paul. This is from his famous Urdu novella, which was translated into English as Sleepwalkers. Now, this would maybe remind you of Professor Niaz Zaman's talk as well on day one of the webinar, where she was mentioning the Muhajir community. So here it goes. We haven't moved anywhere, bhai. Coming and going is the business of tourists like you. Anyway, the same place cannot be located at two locations. Our Lucknow is the only Lucknow. We don't understand any other Lucknow. Natives do not just represent their land, they become the native land. If you have any doubts, shall I open my mouth and show you something? Come close, sir. One of Nawab Asifuddola's Thumri Mehfil is in progress in my throat. And again, I'll come back to this quote. Now, finally, Pakistani writer Mumtaz Shah Nawaz, who wrote a famous and quite a big novel called The Heart Divided. It's not very well known and out of print as well, but it's quite a key text within the context of Pakistan. Now, for a moment, I'll go back to Manto's quote before finally talking about Mumtaz Shah Nawaz, that the nostalgia that Manto lived with is kind of reflecting in Joginder Paul's work as well, because this quotation is a dialogue from by his protagonist, who is called Divana Divana Maulvi, who has migrated from Lucknow to India, but he somehow experiences some kind of post-colonial amnesia, as for instance discussed by Professor Ananya Kabir, that he is just unable to reconcile with the fact that partition has happened. And he thinks Karachi is Lucknow, and he even mentions the names of the streets of Lucknow in Karachi. And as a migrant or a member of the Muhajir community, he is continuously dislocated, perhaps not in the sense Toba Tek Singh was dislocated, because he virtually collapsed. But this Divana Maulvi has psychologically collapsed because his amnesia is kind of never ending. Um, Finally, now this quotation is from Mumtaz Shah Namaz's novel, where a Hindu protagonist wants to marry a Muslim boy, and this is a dialogue between her and her father. So she says, her father is debating that why does she want to marry a Hindu boy, and it's not happening in the present cultural, uh, religious, historical, and political context. So she says, laws, customs, we live in the same land, breathe the same air, till the same fields, reap the same corn, drink from the same springs. Is there not a greater law than the law of communities, the law of humanity that denies any barrier between man and man? Is there not a greater custom than the pretty customs that have grown up in the marketplace? The custom of nature in which blood attracts blood, regardless of caste and creed. Oh, Father, you have fought and suffered for the great national cause. Are you going to build your nationalism upon the flimsy foundations of communal barriers? Now, why I chose these quotes? One, they are by these classic writers who are identified with reference to partition, and two, somehow I think what reflects from Divana Maulvi's utterance of being unable to distinguish between Lucknow and Karachi, and Mohini's argument about the communities being divided on the basis of religion, and these are the communities who've lived together forever, is applicable today as well. And I suppose this is also the kind of context in which we are producing this ongoing research, and I'll talk a bit more about it later. So, if we have to overview the overarching themes of partition literature, or theoretical perspectives of partition, there is a discussion about 1947, but generally not about 1971. And for instance, I've mentioned Aisha Jalal there, and I mention her because she argues that Indian and Pakistani historians present their own version of history, and there is one is blaming the other, and this is a kind of an ongoing debate, also critiqued by Ian Talbot. Now, these themes also include nostalgia. For instance, in the works of Joginder Paul or Saadat Hasan Manto. They are also talking about national, regional, and personal memories, as for instance, discussed by Ananya Kabir in case of Kashmir. And this trauma is interpreted through Kathy Carrott's theoretical perspective. Now, trauma and laws, gender and sexuality, Urvashi Butalia and Yasmin Saika have talked about it by collecting oral histories. And construction of the other and stereotyping and jingoism is happening a lot in films being produced in Bollywood. And some examples are Fana, Qurban, and Hindustan Ki Kasam and Upkar. So I'm not talking a lot about films because we already had a detailed discussion about the discourse of film. Now, the context, we come from this context, both Roshni and me, and when we conceived the project of co-editing this work, we talked about, of course, we talked about partition, that's obvious, but we also talked about the distances that remain between us as academics. And I mean, we were able to only bridge them in the University of Leiden, where we were both presenting our papers. And, kind of, I had a short postdoc stay in Europe, and I continued discussing this with Roshni and continued meeting her. And it was a big, I think it is a pity that, we had to conceive the project really in Europe, and while also criticizing Europe and being staunch post-colonialists. So, we thought, I mean, we collectively think that the research gap that we want to identify or highlight is that there is a lot of discussion on partition and the atrocities of partition and the violence of partition, but there is really any discussion about kind of accepting the reality of partition. We go on talking about trauma, and we go on talking about we can't get over it, and we continue, our children continue reading the history where India is the enemy, or Pakistan is the enemy, or Bangladesh is the enemy. But unfortunately, in this whole process, which might be a colonial legacy, or might be due to the state pressures, we are really losing the common historical and cultural ties. And I think this is um, uh, really important. For instance, I'll try and elaborate it a bit more, that one of the contributors in our book, Nishat Haider, has mentioned that the violence of partition is much more worse than the legacy of partition is much more worse than the partition itself. So, in some ways, I feel that we are kind of carrying on and owning that legacy to that extent that we've really forgotten thinking about how we're going to continue building the bridges. Secondly, we feel that there are rarely any ethnographic observations and academic discussions about post-partition developments, and there is rarely any interdisciplinary research. Perhaps there is more interdisciplinary research in India as compared to Pakistan. I literally teach partition literature and Indian and Pakistani literature nearly every year, at least once a year, and it's a big I mean, the sorry side is that there's not much happening to kind of bridge the ethnographic approaches, for instance, with art, with visual images, with oral histories, or have a discourse where literature and history is in dialogue with each other. And it's easier, I know it's easier said than done, but it's not impossible. And I'm going to end my discussion by just giving some ideas about how this is possible. And I think all of the audience, or the department, and people who are working in the discipline of literature really need to think about it, because if we are going to continue being stuck in literature and applying theory to literary texts, we cannot unfold these complicated issues. We cannot strengthen the bridges, and we cannot have a dialogue. So we cannot separate the literary discourse, in other words, from the political discourse, from the historical discourse, and from various ways of approaching research perspectives or creating research perspectives. And one more issue that we discussed, me and Roshni, were the overarching influence of Bollywood, which has really suppressed all other kinds of media. For example, there is real discussion on social media, the dialogue between India, Pakistan, Bangladesh through social media, or through other forums, or other discourses. And this is why this book project was also conceived by initiating India and Pakistan Academic Network via Facebook page, which has more than 1,000 members now, and we are constantly sharing research with each other. And I'm pleased that we were able to somehow break through to create this kind of a dialogue. Now, when we think about post-partition dialogue through media and literature, we do need to think about that. What are we losing? Are we losing the history of why are we losing it, and how have these nations survived jointly? We are so stuck in the political disputes and pressures that we are really not thinking about that we did survive together very for a long time until the partition happened. So why this intellectual disconnect is kind of an ongoing experience for all of us. The other problem is that uh, in India, for instance, when again I'll mention Professor Niaz Zaman, and she's talking about the art of Kantha, um, and I think it's really an important piece of work. And but however, in Pakistan there is not much discussion of between bridging art and text, and in other words, deconstructing the uh, partition trauma or post-partition experience through creating this bridge between art and text. And one more point is that there is a lot of work on documenting ethnography, collecting oral histories with reference to partition. But there is nothing on post-partition ethnography or oral history or experiences. And perhaps the partition archive has done much more than what we as academics could do in terms of publishing research or books on post-partition experiences. Now, another important thing, because I work on discourses and non-literary forms of expression as well, I found this very interesting article, and I think we should all consult it if we are interested in discourses. This is by Sushil Sivaram, Restaging the Post-Colonial in the World, the Jaipur Literature Festival and the Pakistan Novel. Now, this is I mentioned this article because Sivaram is talking about how these festivals create the image of the other. I mean, despite being liberal discourses and kind of open to inviting people from across the border, sometimes open and perhaps not at other times, depends on the political regime, I guess. But there is so much happening through such discourses. So we need to really move beyond the text and talk about these developments, and which are perhaps complicating the history of partition more than uh, more than what we read in books, and more than that physical violence that has happened, because it's changing the um, geopolitical map or intellectual abilities or intellectual approaches for South Asian academics. And finally, with reference to partition or post-partition developments, there is really any work on digital humanities, at least not in Pakistan. Perhaps in India, but I haven't explored that much, and it is perhaps much a subject of much importance. Now, when we address in this, in the context of the previous discussion, when we address South Asian identity through developing mediascapes and visual discourses, but particularly in the book that we are working on, we talk about the love-hate relationship between the states, and we explore we actually want to explore the constructive aspects of this relationship. So it doesn't have to be more love or more hate, or it doesn't have to be balanced, but we need to really look at the constructive aspects, because I believe as academics there is a lot of space and potential for us to do it. And we also need to explore the disregarded cultural links, and by that I mean perhaps the artifacts or any artistic cultural legacies that we've not researched on. And finally, contemplating the positive future of the subcontinental neighbors. So again, this reminds me of mentioning Nagugi when Nagugi's title pen points and gun points, and because the power that the pen has, and primarily the pen of the academic, is not being properly utilized, and to an academic these borders do not matter, because if they do matter, then they cannot really be a sincere academic, I suppose, because you have to remain unbiased politically when you write and publish. So just to wind up the discussion on the book, so we have these three overarching themes: soft power, media, and performance. We've discussed some films on Kashmir, for instance, Haider. Um, and the contributors have talked about trauma of a militarized zones. We've discussed the films by Ritik Ghatak. We've discussed the silence in performing arts, for instance, in Bangladesh, and somebody has particularly worked on the theatre. Secondly, we worked on art and visual culture and the intersection between art and memory of hatred and violence. And we've also talked about cyberspace, social media, and digital text, and how jingoistic nationalism reflects through, for instance, social media, or how the images of, for instance, political figures from Pakistan is created in India, or vice versa. So this was my overview for you, which kind of reflects the direction that our research is taking in future. But I also want to talk about something briefly, something other than what we are going to publish in this book related to the mediascapes. And this is something to think about for the academics interested in partition studies, post-partition studies, and post-colonialism, that we do need to really think about the alternative discourses and unconventional ways of studying um, literary text or art, or um, analyzing them side by side, because the whole identity issue in relation to South Asia, or in the aftermath of partition, is so complicated that it really needs to be understood in a broader perspective. And that broader perspective is definitely going to come through discussing all these alternative discourses and being sensitive about them, and perhaps writing about them. So two examples I give here is in terms of alternative discourses. I give two examples. One is about the Kashmir, the image of Kashmir in literary texts. For instance, in the works of Basharat Peer, his memoir called Curfewed Nights. And the second is by Asya Zahoor's poetic expression, Serpents in My Veil, recently published, but very, very powerful in terms of Kashmir, Kashmir's political context, and the ongoing war in Kashmir. And the second, I've mentioned in the second box, I've mentioned images of 9/11. But actually, these are images. I'll talk a bit more about the images, and these are two Pakistani artists, Rashid Rana and Risham Saeed. I'm going to talk about it a bit more a little later. So, in terms of Basharat Peer's Curfew Nights, the genre of memoir is so important because I think he's selected it deliberately, because he's not going to fictionalize the violence in Kashmir, and it's really. I've attended a talk by Basharat Peer at Lahore Literary Festival, and I was really touched by his sensitivity and emotions about Kashmir and his realistic expression about it. So this is one example that I took, and I'm still working on it. But I particularly chose, and in the context of the discussion that I just had, I particularly chose the symbol of shrine used in Curfew Nights, because Basharat Peer has quite cleverly used the symbol of shrine as a sacred and political space, a space for self-representation and a space for creating resistant self and subversive discourses. So if you get a chance, I think it's worth a read again, because in many ways, on the one hand, the trauma of violence going on in Kashmir is being balanced by this kind of a Sufistic image of a shrine, and Sufi practices, and how people can have access to relax or uh, be themselves within the space of a shrine. But on the other hand, within this shrine, there also people are getting the opportunity to discuss the future of the resistance movement in Kashmir. So I want to explore that a little bit, but in some ways I felt this was quite unconventional and quite tricky approach that Basharat Peer had used in this memoir. The second Kashmiri writer that I want to mention is Asiya Zahoor. Now she's published this very interesting book that I mentioned earlier, uh, and she's really writing about the um, experiences. She, as a contemporary writer, she's kind of poeticizing the.
Madam, your slideshow.
Sorry,
Madam, slideshow. Please make a slideshow. It's not coming. Make it full.
sorry. Make the
Your
slide.
slideshow, madam. Make it full,
Oh,
please.
okay. Is it okay now?
Yeah, full screen.
Okay. So Asiya Zahoor
Yes,
has
yes, it's
talked
fine.
about, as you know, that there are already two quite well-known female poets from Kashmir, Lal Ded and Haba Khatun. But I found amongst all these male writers writing about Kashmir, like Mirza Waheed and Basharat Peer, I found her work very, very interesting, because she talks about body memory and history. Um, and Shafi Shawk, who's contributed to the introduction of the book, regards her work as calligraphy of wounds. And she's bridging the folk and contemporary. So she's taking the folk tales, folk legends from Kashmiri literature, and also turning them into contemporary poetry. There is a lot of intertextuality, references to Western writers and theorists like Freud. She's also putting in poetry and image together. Like for instance, in Gifts for My Daughter Not Yet Conceived, there is an image of a woman who is who has conceived a baby, and so it's she uses the images really strongly, and most of all, her feministic approaches of voicing the suppression of Kashmiri women. So here is an example from her poem. If you get a chance, do read her book. But I think it's very interesting because references to Greek mythology. I'm not going to read the whole poem, but it's there and it's going to be part of my slides when I send it later on. That the reference to Medusa, and a woman being so strong that people, or the forces who are trying to kill women and minors in Kashmir do not have the courage to their eyes, but they go on blindly killing them. So it's a very strong message. And there is a short film by Asiya Zahoor, The Stitch, and we must watch it if somebody is interested in on working on Kashmir, because this is a 9-minute film, and it's a silent film. The only few dialogues are about the announcements about curfew on the radio in this film. It's I want to argue again in the context of my earlier discussion that she has strongly used the power of an image through this documentary or a short film. And but she basically, the film is about a young 9-year-old girl who's traumatized in Kashmir, and she runs to school through the barbed wires to reach her school. And then she doesn't have the money. She wants to buy a headscarf, and she doesn't have 200 rupees, but there is an art competition in the school, and she draws a self-portrait with showing that her scarf is torn from her head, because she goes through the barbed wire every day, and she stitches her headscarf every day. So it's quite a traumatizing image. But I think in the context of my discussion again on media, bridging media and literature, I think Asiya Zahoor, both through her poetry and through her short film, has really successfully tried to deconstruct the debate and dialogue about Kashmir. Now, this is Rashid Rana, a Pakistani artist. I've used his work in my recent work on literary and non-literary responses towards 9/11, and it's an ideal image and bridge of image and text for me, because I've discussed the literary texts about post 9/11 trauma in the light of W.J.T. Mitchell's argument that after 9/11, there was a pictorial turn in the US, and the image of 9/11 in the form of twin towers is kind of replicated and reinforced constantly to change the public opinion and political views of people and reinforce the overarching image of the US around the world. So it's interesting because I couldn't open my file. I wanted to show this image, and somehow, the file was corrupted in my computer. So I searched on the net, and I found this image this time in India, Pakistan, some India, Pakistan exhibition or art gallery, or web link that I've given at the end of the slides. So it's interesting for me to discuss it right now after a year after I've published a book, because um, I have deconstructed Rashid Rana's work in the light of 9/11, and I've talked about twin towers and how his image of an aeroplane reflects the response towards 9/11. And he has in real life also. He was in the US when the event happened. But I have found the image also discussed in relation to India and Pakistan. So it's interesting because I feel that, these partitions are happening at multiple levels. And, this is one example of it, that we look at one image from one perspective of partition, but then there are so many other political partitions happening through various discourses. So I'm going to just wind up. I don't have anything on the slide saying final comments, because this is an ongoing discussion, and I'm privileged and honored to be part of a broader South Asian community when I was invited for this webinar. But I would like to reinforce, I'm happy to answer questions. This was just an overview of an ongoing work. And but my message again is that we need to have more intellectual dialogue and debate about partition. And though partition literature is not my main area of research, I work on post-partitions in Pakistan, and the political divisions between communities, the pressures that they face within Pakistan, and the kind of resistance literature that they produce. So I hope I've been able to connect with the theme of partition of this webinar. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, madam, for your excellent presentation. And as
Thank you.
usual, we are having lots of do you think testimonials by survivors can be seen as legacy of the partition? That is from Chetna Karnani. Do
Sorry,
you
can you
think
specify
testimonials by survivors can be seen as legacy of the partition?
the testimonies of the survivors?
Yeah, testimonials by survivors. Testimonials by
I
survivors
would
can be
see it
seen as
as
legacy of the partition.
I, I would see it as oral history. But why? I don't think we could. I mean, how much more are we going to complicate the concept of legacy? you know And how much more are we going to talk about trauma? It is trauma. And I remember that when I was in India last time for a conference, um, we did have this discussion which turned into a debate. And because people did not like the idea that we should not talk about partition. But I'm not saying that we should not talk about partition, but I'm saying we should move on and accept so many other realities that we faced in the aftermath of partition.
Okay, ma'am. Now another person is telling about Manik Sambar. He's telling about, madam, do you have you gone through any sort of writing where they have told about the yeah mm, yes,
Sorry,
the
I didn't get the
torture of the
question.
Kashmiri
I can't hear
Pandits.
you.
The torture on the Kashmiri Pandits. Did you have gone through any sort of book where, after the partition, there were torture on the Kashmiri Pandits?
I think Mirza Wahid talks about Pandits a bit, but Basharat Peer is mostly talking about his experience in Delhi and of returning to Kashmir and writing about the atrocities happening in Kashmir. But if you read The Collaborator by Mirza Wahid, he is mentioning the Pandit community and their trauma a little in his fictional work.
Okay, madam. Thank you, madam. And how are identities caught between the two worlds? That is a question from Ekta Ladda. How are identities caught between the two worlds?
Sorry, I didn't get it. Your voice is breaking.
Voice is breaking. আমি তো কিছু শুনতে পাচ্ছি। Can you hear me, madam?
Yes. No, I can't hear you. I've lost the voice.
এটাই করতে হবে এটাই।
এটা তো করতে হবে, এটা আমি শুনতে পাচ্ছি না, তারপরেই তো কত কিছু হচ্ছে। Hello,
Yes, I can hear you now.
hello, can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes. Yeah, I can. Thank you.
Hello,
Yes, I can hear you now.
yes.
I can hear you.
Did you get the question, ma'am?
No, I don't. I didn't hear the question.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Ekta Ladda wants to ask you, how are identities caught between us? That means India and Pakistan. How are identities caught between India and Pakistan after the partition?
How our identities got caught, right?
Yeah, how are identities caught between us? That means India and Pakistan after the partition.
God, that's such a difficult question. um, how our identities were caught between India and Pakistan? I think we are quite stuck in our systems, and our there is no intellectual freedom. There's no freedom of expression, and people don't want to talk about certain things. At least on at least that's what I feel at my end of the border. So identity is an important issue, but the more we talk about differences, I think the less we are going to have an intellectual dialogue. So I guess if there are differences and we accept them um, as one aspect of our identity, we still the discussion about these differences must go on. I hope that answers the question somehow.
Yeah, yeah. And another question is from Gunjan Chaturvedi. Can you hear me, madam?
Yes.
Yes, Gunjan Chaturvedi asked, do you really think it is possible to move on when we are surrounded by the tales, oral histories, and emotional records of pre-partition days?
That's another difficult question. Um, See, if my family did not migrate, so I'm really not the right person. But I fully empathize with people. Yes, when I talk about this in India, people do ask me this question that do you think it's too traumatic and we can't move on? But eventually you have to realize that even when we lose a loved one, we do move on and we do find a direction in our lives. And we are living with this legacy and with this traumatic history, but we need to find ways of at least reducing the negativity that surrounds these identities or that exists between these borders. So, like Professor Niazaman said, that people had to come for going to gurudwaras to be able to meet Pakistanis, and there were restrictions on them. There are restrictions on visa, but there should be no restrictions on academics. I mean, even nowhere in the world refuses a visa for an academic. So how are we going to get over all this if within your own house you keep talking about your own trauma? Are you going to ever get out of it? If you've never been to Pakistani Punjab, for instance, or you've never been to a historical spot in Sialkot and Faisalabad or Multan or anywhere, and you've not virtually experienced what the history is and how people treat you, how you can never grow out of that trauma. So in my perspective, this is getting more traumatized because of all these pressures that we live in, and they kind of influence us so much that we've actually stopped approaching each other as people, as people who belong to another generation, not the generation who was directly traumatized. So there has to be some movement, there has to be some change. And I think I am very hopeful. Academia is very powerful, and I'm really hopeful. It is a possibility that this dialogue can continue.
Okay, madam. Thank you. I hope the person who has questioned it has got the answer. Now, mm, there is another question from Chetna Karnani. Allow me to extend your analogy, madam. It is like losing a loved one every time you attempt to forget the earlier one. A
I
victim
can't hear
cannot
you.
move on from the trauma of partition, lest they get silenced about it. What is your take on that?
Sorry, I've lost half of your conversation.
Yes,
The
madam.
voice is
Can you hear me?
your voice is breaking. I didn't get the whole thing.
Oh, my voice is breaking.
Like you have to
Really?
wait, wait.
Wait a bit, madam. Please, please, please.
Yes, madam. Can you hear me?
Little better, but very low.
Yeah, very low. Yeah. Uh, the question that I asked basically that was a question from Chetna Karnani. She,
Can you type the question, please? Because I still can't hear you. Just type it and I'll answer it.
oh, you cannot hear me, man. You can't hear me.
Now I can hear you. If you hold the mic, then I can hear you.
Yes, 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 ma'am. So the question
Okay.
is, moving on is the acceptance of the political discourse, which is the opposite of resistance. Now, what is that demarcation?
God, the questions, people. Can you simplify your questions? I can't answer some questions, because I'm not in that powerful, authoritative position. I'm a poor academic, so please spare me. Um, I don't know, maybe we need another webinar to answer that question and
Yes, madam.
surrounding that theme.
Yes, yes, yes,
I,
definitely.
I
Okay,
don't have
now,
any immediate answers. I'll be happy to think about and then answer.
yeah, yeah. Now, one Subhashini Ramchandran, she is telling that scholars like Dipti Misri discuss how ongoing religious insurgency in India is actually the after effect of religious communalism during partition. With this in mind, can we say we can move on? That is Subhashini Ramchandran.
Oh, that's really, really hard. Well, the religious bifurcation happened at the time of partition. I suppose is being used as a political tactic here. So, if you
Yes,
are educated enough and politically conscious and person and making your own decisions, I don't think you should really go with the flow. You know, it's a political strategy in some cases. I don't want to
yes.
name anyone, but you know what I mean.
Yes, madam. Yes, madam. Thank you very much, madam. These are the questions and other questions. I guess these are not related to your topic. And I mean, these are questions which should, they are telling they are out of context. Once again, thank you very much for madam for coming
Thank
to
you
this
so much.
webinar.
Thank you so much
It,
having me with you
yeah,
here.
it has been wonderful listening to you, and hope that in the future ventures also, if we seek your support, we'll be getting that through
Definitely,
different sort of platforms or like that. Nice talking
definitely.
with you, madam. It has
Thank
been
you so
really
much.
pleasure talking. Okay, thank
Thank
you,
you.
madam.
Okay.
Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Bye. Bye.
Okay, that was Professor Langer from Pakistan. She was the first speaker, and I would like to tell the people uh, who are attending it, please put the questions which are in context of the lecture. Do not ask those questions which are not related, which are not relevant. Kindly do that. Okay, we are right now moving on to our next speaker, mm, and he is a very respected academician in this part of the world, and that is Professor Dipendu Das. Professor Dipendu Das, who is Dean of Sunitikumar Chattopadhyay School of English and Foreign Languages in Assam University. And she is also a very, very renowned professor of English in Assam University, Silchar. Now, before we uh, go on to listen to Dr. Das, I must tell something about his achievements and his life up to this point. Professor Dipendu Das is currently working as professor in English at Assam University, Silchar. He did his PhD on the plays of Arthur Miller and specializes in drama studies. His current interests are Indian English literature, translation studies, and migration studies, etc. He has been teaching at undergraduate and postgraduate levels for more than 30 years. More than 35 scholars have completed their PhD thesis and MPhil dissertations under his supervision. He has presented papers and acted as chairpersons in more than 50 national and international seminars or conferences in different universities in India and abroad. He was the recipient of Ukeiri Grant, UKEIRI, Ukeiri Grant for UK India Staff Exchange Program in 2011 that included research work at Queen's University, Belfast, for pursuing further research on translation studies. He has completed UGC major research project on pangs of marginalization, crisis, and assertion of identity in the literature of the Tea tribes of Assam, a study, and at present he is engaged in a major ICSSR research project titled Partition of India and the Northeast, Issues of Migration and Identity. He has published extensively in national and international journals and books. He has edited jointly a few books like Kushilov in 2007, which is a theater journal, then Ethnicity and Conflict, India and Canada, Social, Literary, and Cultural Readings in 2010, then Burb Fence, Stories of Displacement from the Borak Valley of Assam 2012, then Drama Theory, Text and Performance in 2015, then Macaulay's Ghost, English Studies in a Post-Globalized World, Dalit Writing from Eastern India, which is in print in Oxford University Press, then Migration and Identity Issues, Emerging Discourses on Northeast India, which is also in print. Professor Dipendu Das is also a creative writer and has published a Bengali short story collection, Britter Baire, that was published from Akshar Publications 2008. He is a theatre activist. Dr. Das has written several plays also and musicals for stage, radio, and film script for television, many of which have won awards and received wide acclaim. So here I now welcome Professor Dipendu Das, who is Dean, SKC School of English and Foreign Language Studies, and he is a professor in Department of English, Assam University, Silchar. Over to you, sir, for your deliberation, and nice to have you on the podium.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and I just wanted to know before I start my deliberation whether I am audible.
Yes, sir, you are perfectly audible.
Okay,
You
am
are
I
perfectly
visible?
audible. Yes, yes, sir.
Okay, then you just let me know now whether now am I audible now?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Now, good afternoon to everybody, whoever is there watching me and listening to, or rather, willing to listen to me in this online mode. So, good afternoon to everybody. And at the outset, I would like to express my thanks to Netaji Subhas Mahavidyalaya Udaipur, Tripura, and the Department of English of the college for inviting me to deliver a talk in the international webinar. I wish them all very best, particularly to the organizers and Surujit and team. This online interaction facilitates communication across the globe on a subject, and the subject we know is very interesting and very significant and highly relevant. And this subject necessitates communication across cultures. In sync with the spirit of the conference, or rather the spirit of the subject of this webinar, I decided to talk on the role played by translation that helps in creating a bridge over the fences of mental space often created among diverse communities and cultures. The title of my paper is Partition, Migration, Cultural Interface, colon, Translation as Mediator. And in the context of this, I have given special focus to Assamese and Bengali literature of Assam. I begin with a poem, a very famous poem by John Keats, on first looking into Captain Somers. Now, this poem, Keats has written, those who are students of English literature, I don't have to explain to them, but then there are people who might have not come across this poem. Now, this poem actually was written by John Keats after he had gone through the translation of Homer's Epics through George Chapman. Now, this is the response or reaction of the poet after he has written the translation of Homer's Epics. And I take up a few lines of the poem, and the poem is a sonnet, and I begin with the poem, which is, I find, very important for this particular topic. Much have I travelled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Round many western islands have I been, which bards in filthy to Apollo hold. Often of one wide expanse had I been told, that deep-browed Homer ruled as his demesne, yet never did I breathe its pure serene, till I heard Chapman speak out loud and bold. Now the great admiration of John Keats for the Greek poet Homer and his Iliad and Odyssey, the two epics, which were carried across to him through translations into English by George Chapman, gets immortalized in his sonnet on first looking into Chapman's Homer. The poet was candid in his confession that it was Chapman's translation that made his appreciation of Homer possible,
Sir,
because
excuse me, sir.
he did not know Greek language. By doing
Sir,
so, yes,
sir, you please go a little backwards or up your computer. You are not fully visible. Yes, that is fine, sir.
now,
Yes, it's
okay,
fine.
okay, fine. Okay, am I audible?
Yeah, yeah,
Am
it's
I
audible.
audible?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, fine, fine,
Okay,
fine.
sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Now, the great admiration of John Keats for the Greek poet Homer and his Iliad and Odyssey, the two great epics, were carried across to him through translation into English by George Chapman. Gets immortalized in this sonnet on first looking into Chapman's Homer. Now, as I mentioned, the poet was candid in his confession that it was Chapman's translation that made his appreciation of Homer possible, because he did not know Greek language. By doing so, Keats also pays a huge tribute not only to the translator, also to the translated product, but also, unintentionally though, to the act of translation, and in the process touches upon the issue of the role played by translation in the dissemination of ideas and across cultures, while mediating or negotiating in cultural interface. Translation, as we know, is an integral facet of multicultural and multilingual existence that evolves out of migration of people from one place to another. Though it seems that multilingualism has become a normal necessity across the world today, particularly due to globalization and wider cultural communication, it in fact was very much prevalent in the ancient period, particularly in India. I'm talking of ancient India, undivided India, as the country had been a site of large scale migration through the ages, which played a crucial role in the peopling of India and the formation of its society. Rabindranath Tagore seems to be referring to this feature in his poem, and I quote his poem Bharatbarsho, where according to him, and I have translated this to this line of his poem, Aryans, non-Aryans, Dravidians, Afghans and Mughals have come and marched in one supreme body. Unquote. This explains the existence of a huge number of indigenous languages in the country. 1,652 as per 1961 census. And also the enormous crossover in languages and ethnicity, which have given rise to complication in studying various population groups, as in many cases, ethnic origins and linguistic affiliations match only inexactly. For example, while the Orang Adivashis are classified as an ostrich group, their language, called Kuruk, is Dravidian. The Nicobaris are considered to be Mongoloid group, and the Munda and the Santal Adivadis are ostrich groups. But all folk speak Austro-Asiatic languages. The Wheels and Gonds Adivashi are frequently classified as ostrich groups. Yet wheel languages are Indo-European and Gondi languages Dravidian. Hence, it is evident that cultural pluralism and multilingualism have always been important aspect of Indian society, which dates back historically to a very ancient period. Today, more than 255 million people speak at least two languages, and 87.5 million speak three or more languages in India. This is as per the data provided in Times of India report March 14, 2010. Naturally, multilingualism and consequently translation have always been considered an important tool of socialization in India. It's very interesting to note that the Ashokan inscription illustrate this fact as they are considered to be the earliest tools which were written in four different scripts. Ashoka made use of multiple scripts in different parts of his empire. In Afghanistan, he used Aramaic in Greek and Greek scripts for his edicts. In Pakistan region, he used Kharusti, and for the rest of his empire, Brahmi script was used. The use of as many as four languages, Sanskrit, Shauroshani, Maharashtri, and Magdhi, in Kalidasa's Abhigyana Shakuntalam, written in a period between 1st and 4th centuries, bears testimony to the complex multilingual context that went into the evolving of multilingual texts. As translation is an integral part in any discourse in a multicultural context, a multilingual site like India can be an ideal case study for realizing the role of translation as a mediator in intercultural interface. From conceiving a thought to composing and expressing the idea in written, verbal, or non-verbal forms, or through other intersemiotic mode of expression, what is involved in all the cases is different types of translation. It is particularly so in a multicultural domain like India, where interaction from domestic domain to informal and formal spaces beyond the familial arena involve translation in more and more increasing order. India traditionally has been a multilingual, multicultural, multiracial, and multireligious site conducive for the accommodation of pluralistic ideas. And I quote from Indranath Choudhury from his essay Meeting India Through Translation, and he observes, Indranath Choudhury observes, and I quote, it is an integrative framework of a nation displaying a unity in diversity. The real tradition of India is to work for an adjustment of races, acknowledge the dual differences between them, and yet seek some basis of unity. Unquote. In the intercultural interface in a nation like India, with 22 languages recognized in the 8th schedule of the Constitution, 15 different scripts, hundreds of mother tongues, and thousands of dialects, translation has always played a decisive role. One can very well say that India is a translating consciousness, and the very circumstances of their real existence and the conditions of their everyday communication have turned Indians bilingual, if not multilingual. In this context, it would not be an exaggeration if one adds that India would not have been a nation without translation, as Indians keep translating almost unconsciously from their mother tongues when they converse with people who use a language different from their own. K. Sachidanandan has rightly pointed out in his essay, Translation, Its Role and Scope in India, and I quote him, translation has helped knit India together as a nation throughout our history. Ideas and concepts like Indian literature, Indian culture, Indian philosophy, and Indian knowledge system would have been impossible in the absence of translation with their natural integrationist mission. The rise of national fervor in the decades before the independence fostered the need for the assertion of cultural identity and consequently the concerted efforts towards the growth of indigenous literary tradition. As such, translation from Sanskrit into different Indian languages was taken up with all urgency. This helped in liberating the scriptures, I mean Sanskrit scriptures, from the monopoly of a restricted class of people, and also the reorganizing of the society. At the same time, translation from different Indian languages into Hindi commenced in a big way, as it was considered to be a national act necessary for the purpose of national integration and also a part of anti-colonial struggle. The advocacy in favor of Hindi or Hindustani as a national language received impetus during this period. Simultaneously, interlingual translation among Indian languages was considered a national need for countering linguistic division and fostering intercultural communication. The purpose behind the establishment of Sahitya Academy on 12th March 1954 was the promotion of literature in different languages in India. The four centers of academy were devoted to translations in different parts of the country for the promotion of interlingual translation in Indian languages and also into English. Interestingly, in the closing years of the 20th century, the Sahitya Academy decided to translate Rabindranath Tagore's novel Gora into 21 Indian languages after the communal violence erupted during the Babri Masjid Ram Janambhoomi controversy in 1992, because the text was considered, as reported in the Kolkata edition of the Times of India, September 10, 2001, and I quote, ideal book to pass on today's generation who were brainwashed into communal frenzy, unquote. In a multicultural society, the translation of a text often entails issues like multiculturalism and integrationism, and is considered as an important instrument to be utilized for mediating intercultural relations for conflict resolution. This becomes evident from the decision of Sahitya Academy, who decided to translate Rabindranath Tagore's Gora into 21 Indian languages. The northeastern region of India in general, and the state of Assam in particular, is a multicultural and multilingual space with various communities having unusual cultural diversities, which shelters the native speakers of more than 220 languages belonging to three language families, namely Indo-Aryan, Sino-Tibetan, and Austric. The Indo-Aryan is represented mainly by the Ohomia and Bangla. Austro-Asiatic is represented mainly by Khashi and the Sino-Tibetan family of languages by the Tibeto-Burman. Significantly, Assam from time immemorial has remained a site of migration and displacement, and these have played important roles in giving shape to the language, culture, economy, politics, and demography of the language, of the region. For instance, the Ahoms, the descendants of the Thai people, migrated from the border between northern Vietnam and Guangxi province of China into the Southeast Asian peninsula and the northern Burma, and subsequently in 1220 AD, led by the Thai prince Shukafa, entered the Brahmaputra valley of Assam. According to Dimasamit, and all these are ethnic groups in India, in particularly Northeast and also in Assam. According to Dimasa myth, the Dimasas had migrated from a place where river Ganga and Brahmaputra meet to the northeastern part of India and got settled in what is present-day Dimapur. Following the defeats in the hands of the Ahom rulers several times, and finally in 1536, the ruling clan of the Dimasas moved to Maibang, and at a later stage, now in Dima Hasao district, and at a later stage to Kashpur of Kachar of southern Assam. There are a few villages in Kachar district where majority population is Bengali, but here these a few district villages are inhabited by Assamese speakers who had migrated from Upper Assam to Kachar during Muammaria rebellion of between 1769 to 1806 and Burmese invasion of 1817 to 1826. The annexation of Assam by colonial rulers and the inclusion of Assam as a part of Bengal presidency in 1826 led to the migration of a good number of people to the state to serve under British administration. The establishment of tea gardens in the early 1820s, gradually, rather since from 1820s, gradually resulted to the formation of a vast tea garden community in Assam with the laborers migrated from different parts of India. Hence, it can be said that the state of Assam has always been a constant witness to phenomenal dislocation and migration of people in the pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial periods, at times driven by economic motives, the establishment of tea garden industry or tea industry in southern Assam and or in Assam, or in some other occasions due to political drawing and redrawing of boundaries between and after the partition of India in 1947. The partition in the eastern part of India during the independence of the country that witnessed an en masse cross-border migration to West Bengal and Assam. I'm talking of the earlier Assam, now several states that include several states of Northeast, has added to tensions and issues arising out of intercultural interface in the region. All these have resulted in the emergence of a quintessential multicultural society having populations of various ethnicities and races, as well as the post-partition migrant populations with even greater racial and ethnic varieties. The movement, the competition for survival, and the constant intermingling of these varied population groups have created a site of cultural interface, which often found expression through conflicts and violence, particularly during several agitations in the post-independence period. The Assam agitation, which lasted for near about 6 years, from 1979 to 1985, it began through protests and demonstrations as means for forcing the government to identify and expel illegal immigrants. Subsequently, the state witnessed steep rise of insurgent activities, particularly in Brahmaputra Valley, with Upper Assam being the epicenter. The impact of unrest could be felt throughout the state as there was complete disruption of regular education as schools, colleges, universities remained closed. There were recurrent burns resulting to acute paralysis of transport and communication. Offices and other public and private institutions remained closed for a very long period. There were extortions, kidnappings, killings, and various other forms of violence. A group of youth dreamed of changing the world at gunpoint, gave up their studies, and joined insurgent activities. There was a steep rise of secessionist activities and violence spearheaded by some separatist organizations. There were mass massacres in communal violence in the places like Nelly and Bahupur. There prevailed a long period of uncertainty in Assam through the last 3 decades of the 20th century. Interestingly, instead of turning its back from the turbulent context, Assamese literature responded amply to the period of socio-political unrest that engulfed the state of Assam and put it into a state of turmoil. Bengali literature from Assam, howsoever peripheral its existence may be in comparison to the so-called mainstream Bengali literature centered at Kolkata or Bangladesh, also did not lag far behind as they also responded to the immediate context, informing the life in Assam. Particularly as a major minority linguistic group who had to bear the brunt of the socio-political tension, experiencing the isolation of otherness, and since the partition of the country. In the context of the above, I would take up a few selected prose narratives from Assam, translated into Assamese, Bengali, and English from pieces which were originally written in Bengali and Assamese, to examine the representation of the context of uncertainty in the literature of the two major linguistic communities of Assam, that is Assamese and Bengali, the cultural interface, the resultant tension, and the role of translation towards the resolution of conflict in a multicultural space. In his prose narrative, The Bengali in the Eyes of the Assamese, which was written in Assamese initially by Homen Borgohain. Homen Borgohain is a renowned Assamese literature and intellectual of India, not merely of Assam, but also a very renowned literature from Assam and also from the country, makes some pertinent observation in regard to the relationship between the Assamese and the Bengali, the two communities who have lived in Assam side by side for near about 2 centuries and even more. And what he says, this coexistence, Homen Borgwai says, has gone into the making of a multicultural site where both the cultures share a lot of commonalities as well as reveal certain distinctive differences. If the coexistence has been marked by the mutual influence of the language, literature, culture of the one on the other, it has also been informed by tension and conflict resulting out of the cultural interface, which at times became violent. And I quote from Homen Borgwai now, Assamese and Bengali are the closest neighbors. They rather seem more than mere neighbors and appears as twins as they display great similarities in their languages, literatures, and cultures. Such resemblances between two linguistic groups are rarely found throughout the world. At the same time, it is also equally true that the tension, anger, and hatred that mark the lives of the two communities living together for centuries are seldom found elsewhere in the world. Unquote. One of the reasons for such dichotomy, as ascertained by Borgohain, is the fact that both the communities nurture certain preconceived notion about the other. The reason for this lack of understanding is the dearth of scope and desire for knowing each other. The translation can play a very significant role in intercultural communication, and this becomes evident in some prose narratives translated from Assamese and Bengali literature from Assam, written in the last 3 decades of the 20th century, which I have already mentioned, one of the most turbulent periods in the history of Assam and also Northeast India as well, that witnessed great erosion of mutual trust between the two communities. Now I come to the discussion very briefly, a few short stories written in Assamese and also in Bengali, and they have been translated into Bengali and English. That means these stories have come to me through translation. The first story, Jighangsha, the slaughter, originally written in Assamese by Imran Hussain, translated into Bengali, the translated Bengali version of which is in Durdiner Dostabej, edited by Vasudev Das, and the English version published in the book The Oxford Anthology of Writings from the Northeast India, compiled and edited by Tilottama Misro. The second short story, which I'll take up, is a Bengali short story written originally in Bengali. Translated version is title is Of Human Bonding by Shyamolendu Chakraborty, translated by Ashok Nandi from the Bengali original Manush.
Sorry, the link is gone. Uh, we had been we had been listening to Professor Das, uh, and his deliberation on partition, migration, cultural interface, translation as mediator, Assamese and Bengali literature of Assam in context. Sadly, the link is gone, and we'll have to wait for the link to come back. Please bear with us this thing. And what he actually uh, wants to highlight through his deliberation is is the title of our international webinar, that is United by Pain, Divided by Pain. Even though we are divided by different sort of boundaries, different sort of senses, still it is the writers, the intellectual heads, basically, which are joining people of this part of the world. So Professor Das had been mentioning some of the seminal texts of the Assamese writing, which had been translated into English and Bengali also, and how this can serve as a joining platform of different sort of ethnic people, different sort of communities, different language speaking people. So and particularly after partition. Partition has been a significant factor here. Yes, so partition has always been, a very important issue with us. How it has affected our style of living, our language, our literature. Hmm? Hello, hello. Sadly, we have lost the link. Can you hear me? Hello, hello. Yes. হ্যাঁ? কিছু আছে এতক্ষণ তো শুনছিলাম ওরা কি হচ্ছে স্যার কোথায় গেল হ্যাঁ hello, hello, can you hear me? Hello, hello, hello. Sadly, we have lost the link. Hello, am I audible to everybody? Am I audible? Yes. So sadly, we have lost the link with Professor Dipendu Das, who had been deliberating on his fantastic topic, that was titled as a partition, migration, cultural interface, translated as mediator, Assamese and Bengali literature of Assam in context. So that was his title, and he chose a platform which is common to us. He feels that only the translation mode can act as a bridging thing, where we have got so many boundaries created by so many differences. Hello, hello. Please bear with us. We have lost the link. Professor Dipendu Das, he was deliberating on partition, migration, cultural interface, translation as mediator, Assamese and Bengali literature of Assam in context. So we don't know what happened with that. There's a technical glitch, but what we understood from his deliberation, that translation can act as a bridging gap all the time. It can, bridge the gap among the people who are living, particularly in Assam. And he talked about the two major communities there, the Assamese and the Bengali people, how they can be on the same bridge, on the same roof by using the the medium of translation. So, and he had talked about some seminal texts which had been translated. One, Bargohai, he had been talking about how his texts have been translated from Ohomia to Bengali, and how these are working as a platform where people people are can interact with each other, where the preconceived notions about each community, can be eradicated. We need to know well each other. We need to know well each other, and therefore the translation can work, especially the translation studies can work as a miracle
for these communities. Hello. Please bear with us. We have lost the link, and we are trying to contact with Professor Das. Professor Das, we are trying to contact with him once again. Please bear with us. Be there on the platform. Be there on the platform, please. Sir was telling, Professor Dipendu Das was telling partition, migration, cultural interface, translation as mediator, Assamese and Bengali literature of Assam in context. It's a very important sort of topic which you had chosen, and very much pertinent to the title of our international webinar, that is united by pains, divided by fence. There are lots of boundaries across us. The boundaries of political boundary, then different sort of ethnic boundaries are also there. Uh, and particularly in case of Assam, there are two communities, two major communities: the Assamese and the Bengali people, and both need to know each other. There are some sort of preconceived notions right now. Uh, Hello, people are telling that I am hardly audible. Hello, yes. So since you have lost the link, I wanted to tell you the thread that Professor Das was telling. He was telling about that cultural interface. It was about that cultural interface. That translation can be a brilliant mediator, and he talked about the multicultural scenario of Assam, where there are some sort of differences between communities, and how translation can act as a link between among the communities prevailing in Assam, and there is the point of the unity, that unity can be created by the writers, by the intellectual brains who are constantly trying to explore the avenues which can link people, and it is for the betterment of humanity in general. Okay, so we are working to re-establish the link with Professor Das. Please stay on tune, and thereafter we have got another speaker from University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Richard Benkin. He will be our last speaker. Sadly, we do not have any link with Professor Das right now, but we want to tell you that the feedback forms that you keep on asking about frequently, it will be given only during the fag end of Dr. Richard Benkin's lecture, who will be talking with us from USA, Pennsylvania today at the late part of this webinar. So Dr. Benkin is expected today, and sadly we have lost link with Professor Dipindu Das, and we are trying to connect with him once again. Please bear with us. And Richard Benkin, Dr. Richard Benkin, we are expecting him anytime on stream yet. And right now, Right now we are expecting to connect with Professor Dipendu Das, uh, and he is not with us right now. The link is missing. The link is missing, sir. Did you contact with sir? This we are trying to connect with Professor uh, Dipendu Das, who had been talking with us over this thing. Transfer. Hello, sir. You have lost the link with you. Please, you. It's a long time, sir. It's around 5 minutes, sir. You were talking about Borguhain, and from that, yes, you can connect from mobile also, sir. Okay, sir. Okay, sir. We're waiting. Please bear with us. Please bear with us. We are trying to connect with Professor Dipendu Das. Yeah. Professor Dipendu Das has lost the link. We are trying to get in touch with him once again. And probably he'll be there within few minutes. Yeah, can you hear me? No, I cannot hear you. No. Hello. 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 Sadly, we have lost the link. We are trying to connect with Professor Dipendu Das.
You can't
Yes,
hear me?
he is on the board right now. He is on the platform. Yes, sir. It's over to you. Yes. Hello, sir.
How are you? How are you?
And we are in the mid of a lecture of Professor Dipendu Das, who has. Hello.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Dr. Benkin, you are audible, but we had lost the link with the previous speaker, Professor Dipendu Das. We are trying to,
You hear me now?
once again.
Can you see
and
me?
Please be there, sir. Please be there because today our connection is very slow. Yes, sir. Sir is back. Professor Dipendu Das is back.
Hello.
Yes, sir. You are audible.
Yeah.
Hello, Shubhas, can you see me now?
Yes, I
sir,
can hear you perfectly. I can hear you perfectly.
Hello.
Yes, hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I can see you. I can
Okay.
hear you, sir. Professor Das.
Am I?
Yes, sir. I can hear you.
Okay, can you? Okay, just now see, I'll go very fast now. You just let me know whether you can hear me now.
Yes, I
Hello?
can hear you, sir. I can hear you, sir.
Can you hear me now? Yes?
Yes, sir. I can hear you.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. You're audible. You are visible.
Now, okay, you just let me know when, where actually I lost the connection.
Sir, you were talking about Borguhai's text. Borguhai's text, and he was translating. You are talking about these translations from Ohomia to Bengali. You were talking about those things, Borguhai's writings.
Okay, now you see, unfortunately, we have lost the link, but then I'll just summarize these things, what I have already said. And if you want, I can send you the audio text, subsequently the full text, audio text, because there is another expert also waiting. So what I was saying is that I was taking up Just a minute. Actually, what I was doing is that I was taking up the issue of the cultural interface between the Assamese and the Bengali of Assam, and the roles that translation can play. Actually, what happened in his prose narrative, the Bengali in the eyes of Assamese, Homen Borgohain, who is a renowned Assamese literature and intellectual, makes a pertinent observation in regard to the relationship between Assamese and Bengali. The two communities who have lived in Assam side by side for near about 2 centuries and even more. Now, what happened is that Borgohain says, and I'm just giving the gist of what he says that they have been living for so long, and there are a lot of commonalities, but then there are a lot of tension between the two societies. Now, Assam, as people know, that Assam had gone through a period of turmoil in the last 3 decades of 20th century, where there were rampant insurgent activities and other kind of violence. Now literature as it is, without giving it back, without turning its back from the issues that were actually were ailing the society at that period of time. In the last 3 decades of Assam, both Assamese literature and Bengali literature of Assam rather went head on and explored the issues set in this context of violence. They rather came up with the issue, the resistance shown by people belonging to both the communities. Now, in detail, I discussed the story which had been written by Imran Hussain Jighangsha, and then by Jighangsha is Imran Hussain. He has written in Assamese, which was translated into English as The Slaughter in 2 volumes. And then there is, it has also been translated into Bengali by Basudev Das. And then I have taken up Manusher Jonno by Shyamalendra Chakraborty, which was translated into English and which finds a place in Barbed Wire Fan Stories of Displacement from the Borak Valley of Assam, edited by Nirmalkanti Bhattacharya and Dipendu Das. Now, and then I have taken up the issue of the short story, Uri Chaudhury's Fire. Now, in Assamese short story, we find, which is set in the context of the insurgency problem in Assam in the last 3 decades of 20th century, which was the epicenter being the Upper Assam, where a young Assamese boy comes back home after a long period of time. He was in his hostel. He comes back and his mother wants to prepare a dainty dish with the 2 pigeons they have at their house. They are very poor, means ordinary people. His father is a retired teacher. So what they do is that they they want to prepare a dainty dish. And the father and the son, when the father comes back home, he was outside. He comes back and he finds that his son is asleep. He is sleeping with his friend. He has come back home with his friend. Now he is deep asleep. So he goes and he could not find anyone to chop off the head of the pigeons, because his son, he knew, would not be able to chop off the head of the pigeon, because he is very timid, calm and quiet and timid kind of a son. Yeah, boy. He could not do it. But then as he went from pillar to post to get it chopped off, today, no one was ready to chop off the head of the pigeon. Now what happened? As he was coming back, he found that someone had reported that there was a police may come to or army may visit the village anytime, because there was some kind of insurgent activities in the town, which was watched by a young boy who is called Benga, who is physically and mentally challenged boy. And the Benga said that a military officer had been killed in firing by the insurgent groups. And then what happens? He comes to and he was told that it is actually his son who was found from a close range means with a pistol shooting that military officer. Now, he doesn't believe it because his son cannot do it. He's a so calm and quiet and young, he's calm and quiet and timid kind of a chap. Now, when he comes back with his unsuccessfully, because no one is ready to chop off the pigeons. So Mohit Chandra was a very dejected man, and he finds that his son has now got up from sleep. And he has started, the son has already scolded his mother. The son had already scolded the mother that why you have asked father to chop off the this pigeon. So to his surprise, Mohit Chandra now finds that his son is Shonti, who looks lean and thin and tired as he touches the feet of his father. He takes the pigeon, Shonti, that his son, who he considered to be timid, takes the pigeon from the cage and begins to chop off the heads of the pigeons without any qualms. The bodies of the poor birds shiver on the floor for some time and then become still. In the dim light of the lantern, Mohit Chandra watches with horror the eyes of his son, Shonti, burning like flame. Now, in Bengali short stories, such as of human bonding, Manush Manusher Jonno, is set in the context of Assam agitation, where Bengali and there were a lot of mistrust between the Bengalis and the Assamese. When it is set in the context of Assam agitation, and this is about the love affair of a Bengali boy and a Assamese girl. Now, this pitted against a world not conducive to the blooming of love between an Assamese and a Bengali, Rupali and Hiren, the boy and the girl and the boy, experience extreme form of hostility in a society that they live in. Faced with the atmosphere of passion and unreason, they try to provide some kind of resistance. In the midst of all engulfing gloom, some rays of hope seem visible as more and more intellectuals and ordinary people come out in protest against the agency of unreason and violence. The story ends as Hiren is attacked by a mob. Rupali comes out to shield Hiren from the violent crowd. Now, in the third short story, which I won't discuss in detail, we find an Assamese man is standing against the senseless violence in Brahmaputra Valley. Now, all these three short stories, the plight and the concern of Mohit Chandra over the Assamese short story Jigangsha, and Hiren and Mohendro of the Bengali short stories of Human Being and Agun are quite similar. Pitted against the passionate outburst of hatred and politics of exclusion, all of them represent the minority voice that tried to uphold sanity and human compassion. In the process, though they were marginalized for a period of time, in fact, initiated the process of resistance that helped in creating an atmosphere congenial for existence in a multicultural abode. All the three short stories thus record the struggle of the agents of peace and sanity, human compassion, mutual coexistence, and the sense of solidarity in a volatile period in the state of Assam, which was charged with passion, suspicion, and hatred. It reveals that resistance against fanaticism, violence, and senseless killing marginalizes those who resist, even though they belong to majority community, and in the process challenge the whole dynamics of self and other. The translations of these short stories from the two important languages from Assam are symptomatic of the role of translations can play in a multicultural society by helping the fostering of space for negotiation through better understanding among different cultures. However, no one would probably agree to acknowledge the fact that there is huge dearth of interlingual translations between Assamese and Bengali literature. In his prose narrative, the Bengalis in the eyes of the Assamese, Homen Borgohain refers to one of the major reasons, as he mentions, that while the Bengalis are exceptionally friendly and helpful, they are also snobbish and seem to look down upon the other cultures and languages. But one may not have much objection to accept partially. I'll take only 2 or 3 minutes. One may not have much objection to accept partially to accept the validity of the observation made by Homen Borgohain on the basis of his personal experience, and the one put forward by Vasudev Das in the introduction to his book mentioned here. But both the observations cannot probably be accepted wholly, as they appear to be somewhat superficial generalizations and not substantive on the basis of lived experiences, particularly in the context of Assam. Moreover, such generalizations also leave certain questions unanswered. There cannot probably be any disagreement on the fact that most of the Assamese readers are really fond of Bengali literature, but the question remains which Bengali literature they usually read. It is certain that barring some rare exceptions, the Bengali literature the Assamese people are acquainted with is mainly Kolkata-centric Bengali literature. They seldom show any interest in the literary responses of the Bengalis, his closest neighbor from Assam and the northeast of India. The translations of Bengali literature to Assamese are mainly the ones published from Kolkata. Moreover, the accusation of snobbery ascribed to the Bengali in general and in regard to displaying lack of interest in the literature and culture of Assamese community seem to be some kind of injustice to the people of Assam today, as the Bengali as a marginal section does not probably afford to express snobbery vis-a-vis to the more dominant culture, language and literature in the state. The politics in the name of religious identity and consequent otherization in East Bengal and the subsequently East Pakistan led to oppression and marginalization, which in turn made a section of the Bengali Hindu to migrate to the northeast of India, particularly to Assam. The politics on the issue of cultural identity in Assam compelled the Bengali to bear the brunt of another facet of otherization, and as a consequence, time and again, put to challenge the identity of the linguistic minority. In the context of such crisis of identity, the Bengali of Assam hardly can afford to enjoy the luxury of looking down upon the language, literature and culture of the majority. The Bengali literature of Assam bears the testimony that Bengali of Assam today is ready to grab the hand of its neighbor spread towards it. A large amount of Assamese literature also sends the same message. Unfortunately, in the absence of extensive interlingual translation between the Assamese and Bengali literature of Assam and in English, the required bridge at the crossroad is yet to be properly built. Now I'm coming to the last paragraph of my, and this is my conclusion. Conflict is often understood in its political sense as a state of hostility between groups of people, usually belonging to different races, religions, and nation states. Mona Baker, in the introduction to her book, Translation and Conflict, a narrative account, demonstrates that translators and interpreters participate in circulating as well as creating narratives that foster the intellectual and moral environment against violent conflict. Wherever we happen to be in the world and whatever type of activity or profession we may be involved in, we now live and function in a climate of conflict that cut across national boundaries and constantly forces itself on our consciousness. In this conflict-ridden and globalized world, translation is central to the ability of all parties to legitimize their version of events, especially in view of the fact that political and other types of conflict today are played out in the international arena and can no longer be resolved by appealing to local constituencies only. Hence, translation through mediation helps in the creation of a platform where the exchange of diverse views and required negotiation become possible. One of the major measures for countering the root cause of tension emerging out of the cultural interface in a multicultural society has been identified as creating an environment conducive for better understanding of the perspective of self and other through more and more cultural exchanges. Translation in the context of Assam, the northeastern states, the rest of India and beyond may play very important role as intercultural mediator. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much. Actually, yeah.
Wonderful session, but we had lost the link for just for a few minutes, and I wanted to give some sort of rejoinder to that, and I hope it satisfies the readers. But there are some very good questions coming up. One is from Ramabrato Chakraborty, who is asking you, if physical partition is nothing but the personification of mental personification, then how can a postmodern man overcomes the ambiguity when he is swinging between nationalism and regionalism?
Sorry, actually here it is raining, heavy rain started. So actually I lost the link. Now also it is coming in, I'm not able to hear you properly.
So the thing is that, say, he wants to ask, how can a postmodern man, overcomes the ambiguity of physical and mental partition when he is swinging between nationalism and regionalism?
Now, you see, I would like to say in the context of the paper that more and more you know the views of the other. The more and more you know the views and the perspectives of the other, then only some kind of dialogue is possible and translation, as in the context of the paper I am saying, translation can play a very important role in this context, because regionalism and nationalism, now you see, what kind of nationalism you are talking of? If you are talking of the nationalism, in the perspective of, if you are nationalism, if you are subscribing to the views of nationalism of Rabindranath Tagore, then there is no issue. There is no problem. There is no problem even nationalism and internationalism, and also you do not have any issue of regional nation. There is no demarcating line between regional, national, and international. Because what kind of nationalism you are subscribing to? If your nationalism is if your perspective is extremely narrow, then you ultimately end up in your regional kind of perspectives and regional, and you subscribe to regionalism. Then also, if it is regionalism, then you have seen that out of several states were created out of Assam in the name of linguistic and cultural identity. Now, even in those states, you will find there are subgroups where the subgroups are coming up with their, they find marginalized even in those kind of smaller, really regional political or political entities. What I intend to say is that even in post-colonial period, I personally, if you and I find, even today I find that Rabindranath can be a very good answer to all these things.
Okay. Okay. Thank
Hello,
you
can
very
you
much,
hear
sir.
me?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me, sir?
Okay.
Huh?
Yes, I
Okay.
can hear you.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir, for the answer. Now,
Okay, thank you so
another question is from Dr. Arun Mukherjee,
much.
who is asking you, how do you relate
Okay,
the
sure.
role of music along with translation works in giving voice to the trauma of partition? Many of Bengali and Assamese songs are examples for that matter. The role
Okay,
of music,
okay.
sir.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Yeah,
Yes,
if
sir.
I have understood, he is probably talking. Yeah, would you please repeat once again?
Yeah. The question
Would
is,
you
sir,
please repeat?
how do you relate the role of music along with translation works in giving voice to the trauma of partition? Many of Bengali and Assamese songs are examples for that matter.
Yeah, of course. I believe it's a very interesting question, and it's not a question. Rather, it's a. I believe
Suggestion.
there are ample works. There are scope for ample works in this field. Actually, music transcends a lot of boundaries, man-made boundaries. I know a professor from Guwahati University. He's a very renowned person. I'm not giving his name. People know him. He told me that the day his father died, he was throughout the night after he came back from the Shamshan Ghat, after the funeral rites, initial rites were done in the Shamshan Ghat, burning Ghat. He came back home, and throughout the night he was listening to Rabindra Sangit, Tagore's song. Now, here what you would say. Now, you see here, translation, of course, can play a very important role, because it is much easier to translate from one Indian language to another Indian language. And music, actually, largely, I am saying, we actually we actually belong to, or rather we actually belong to the same music tradition. So translating music from, or rather song, what you are doing is that you are translating the lyric, but the tune remains the same. And we know that how Rabindra Sangit is so much popular in different languages in India. And apart from that, as he has mentioned, that partition music written in the context of partition, uh, of course, it has a very important role to play. And I would like to add here that during the Assam agitation, music played a very important role. Music played a very important role in countering the resistance of senseless violence, senseless hatred. Music played a very important role in Assam, in the form of people like where Bhupen Hazarika, then many other people of his group, both Assamese and Bengali. They came up and they marched from one place to another, just to with their music, to provide some kind of resistance against this kind of senseless violence and the atmosphere of hatred and unreason.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, I think
Probably satisfies the person who has asked this question, Dr. Mukherjee. Now, thank you very much, sir, for coming to this webinar and your.
thank you so much, and I'm awfully sorry because of this. There has been sudden hail and storm here at Silchar, so it got disconnected, and I also lost the link. Then the last portion I had to do from my mobile.
Okay.
Thank you
Okay,
so
and
much.
it was quite good, sir. The mobile is functioning well. Okay, sir.
Yeah,
Thank you very
exactly.
much, sir. And hopefully,
Okay,
in the
thank you.
coming days also, we'll have similar sort of interaction with you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you very much. It
Thank
has
you
been
so much, and thank your college, Patriot, and
okay.
you and your team, and also your principal and rest of the college. Thank
Okay,
you.
sir. Okay, sir. I'll convey that. Thank you, sir. Have a
Okay.
nice day. Do take care, sir.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Patriot.
Bye bye. Thank you, Patriot.
Patriot. Hello. So our first session, that second two sessions are over. Now we are going to have on our platform Dr. Richard Benkin, who has been called a one-man army for human rights. To take a few examples, he freed a Muslim journalist who was imprisoned and tortured for writing favorably about Israel, helped people escape terrorist violence, and won armed protection for a Hindu temple under attack, and more. In 2019, he and a group of Pashtun activists visited Buchenwald concentration camp to stand together for justice. He travels to South Asian and other cities and remote villages to comfort victims, confront miscreants, including government officials, and gather evidence of human rights abuses that he has shared with the US State Department and others. He also has brought such evidence and its geopolitical consequences to influential members of the United States government on Capitol Hill, and has had extended discussions with our Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Dr. Benkins is one of the foremost fighters to save Bangladesh's Hindus, helping to get a reluctant world to recognize the tragedy. In 2016, he confronted the Bangladeshi government with evidence of the crimes and got it to admit culpability, and is working with both Washington and Dhaka to resolve the matter. Dr. Benkin also works closely with Pashtun, Baluch, and Sindhi activists so they can gain their right to self-determination currently seized by Pakistan. He works closely with them to verify and disseminate the Pakistani human rights atrocities against them, and shares that with the US State Department and others. A sought after writer and speaker, his book, A Quiet Case of Ethnic Cleansing, The Murder of Bangladesh's Hindus, provides verified evidence of anti-Hindu atrocities in Bangladesh, the government's complicity in them, and the rest of the world's deliberate silence about it. In What is Moderate Islam? He brings together Jewish, Hindu, and Muslim voices to help end non-productive and inaccurate polar thinking that either calls all Muslims jihadis or refuses to criticize Islam. He recently gave addresses in both India and Bangladesh on human rights, geopolitical dynamics, and the actions of major powers. Dr. Benkin holds a doctorate from the University of Pennsylvania, has held a number of faculty and business positions, is on a number of boards, and regularly serves as an expert witness in US asylum cases involving South Asian refugees. So this one-man army is there with us right now on this platform, which is captioned United by Pains and Divided by Fence. So here we have Dr. Richard Benkin, the one-man army from USA who is working tirelessly for the betterment of humanity. Over to you, sir, and we are mighty glad to have you on this platform. A very good morning to you, and even though it's evening time to us, a very good morning to you, and kindly enlighten us with the light of your own views, own opinions about your own topic. It's over to you, sir. Thank you very much for coming once again.
Thank you, Dr. Sen, for that incredible introduction. I just really don't know what to say. I hope I don't disappoint with my talk today. And so, yes, it's morning here. Good morning from the United States. And again, thank you.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I offer my apologies for pulling you out of your bed so early in the morning, sir, by my calls.
That's fine. It's not that early, Petrat.
Thank you very much, sir. You may now continue with your presentation, sir.
It's over to
Thank
you,
you,
sir.
sir. Thank you so much. And to both Dr. Sen and to Petrat, thank you both for all you've done to help make this possible. First of all, I want to clarify that my talk has nothing to do with partition literature. Though a scholar, I'm not an academic. I'm an activist. Literature is only important to me for what it does, not for what it is. I look at action and results and little else. So whatever I talk about, the burning question always is, what is to be done about it? Rather than present you with a litany of atrocities, which you can get in a lot of places, including, as Dr. Sen mentioned, my book, A Quiet Case of Ethnic Cleansing, which is available through Akshaya Prakashan in Delhi or on Amazon. So instead of giving you just a litany of atrocities, I'm going to provide you with some information about the progress we've made, the obstacles we face, and again, what's to be done. So for almost 2 decades, I've been fighting the ethnic cleansing of Hindus in Bangladesh. And for the past 5 years, as Dr. Sen mentioned, I've also been working closely with Baluch, Pashtun, and Baluch, Shindi, and especially Pashtuns in their fight against Pakistan's human rights atrocities and cultural genocide, which, you know, is often a fight for physical survival as well. Now, we can say for all of these peoples, if their problems were not created by the 1947 partition, they certainly were exacerbated by them. There's no doubt that the partition of India in 1947 was a bad idea then, and it's been a deadly one ever since. I mean, conceptually, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It promotes the retrograde idea that peoples of different faiths, and in this case, Hindus and Muslims, are simply incapable of living together in one nation. You dress it up however you want. Spew 1,000 apologetics about it. But partition told the West and the rest of the world that third world independence means tribalism and interreligious hatred. Now, we all might know better than that. I hope we do. But the fact of the partition sent the world that false message anyway, and it still resonates today. I can tell you, as I pursue my human rights efforts, that it's still an idea that people have a tough time getting at their head. And in fact, think of it this way, we can even go beyond South Asia. More generally, 64 years after the partition of what was then called British India, we still saw religious factors play a prominent role in the partition of Sudan, and of course in the deadly violence that preceded that partition. Now, back to Bengal. We know that in 1905, Lord Curzon partitioned Bengal only to rescind that edict a mere 6 years later, and it was done largely on religious lines. Certainly, it's delusional to claim that Lord Curzon and the British Raj's efforts caused the enmity between Bengali Hindus and Muslims. That partition certainly provided communal elements with a template for later partition demands. Anyway, 20 years has not gone for nothing. We've made some progress, which I'll get to, but there's still much to be done. And that, again, is what we have to focus on. What can all of us here listening today do to stop this human rights atrocity? Now, People in Tripura and elsewhere in India can see close up what's happening to Bangladeshi Hindus. But a lot of the world can't. They don't know, for instance, that Bangladeshi Hindus face atrocities every day that are never prosecuted by the government. Neither does most of the world know that in Bangladesh, you can be killed for converting from Islam to Hinduism, and the perpetrator will not be prosecuted. That's the key. Perpetrator will not be prosecuted for this. At the same time that forcible conversion to Islam is not a crime. 1 second, I got my timing back. Okay, very good. And many also believe that if there's a human rights problem, it certainly could not be occurring under the Awami League, that it's something that was a function of the Bangladeshi Nationalist Party. Of course, we know none of that. None of those ideas hold water. If anything, it's worse for Hindus in Bangladesh under the Awami League, because that party tries to hide behind a reputation that we all know no longer applies to them. In addition, we have faced 3 obstacles that are pretty unique to this situation and that make it more difficult to convince people that this is an atrocity that has to be resolved. First is the investment of international elites in maintaining the fiction that Bangladesh is a moderate country. Second obstacle is the fact that these atrocities are not carried out by the Bangladeshis themselves, by the Bangladeshi government itself, but that government enables those atrocities by never prosecuting them. And the third is the silence and lack of activism from India and the international community. I want to give you a good example of that. What I tend to do is I gather the data, I gather the information, I vet it, make sure it's solid, and then I go to Washington, D.C., to people in positions of influence to make them aware of what's going on and what should be done. I remember the first time I approached the United States Congressman about this issue. He said to me, "Look, Richard, all of us believe you. We know you for who you are, and about, they know that I only bring good information." He said, "We know you and we believe you." But they said to me, "If this is as important an issue as you say, why do we hear nothing from our Hindu constituents?" In other words, that lack of activism makes it a little difficult for those of us that are trying to. But these are only obstacles, and obstacles are to be overcome. So it's a lot easier for someone sitting in, say, Chicago, like myself, to see. It's a lot easier for us to see the carnage that occurred in Sri Lanka, for instance, or Rwanda in the 1990s. To take 2 of many examples. And because of all those examples, it's a lot more difficult for people to recognize what's happening to Hindus in Bangladesh, although that's certainly just as deadly. In Pakistan's first post-partition census, 1951, it counted Hindus as a bit less than a third of the East Bengali population. That is, even after the movement of peoples, remember this was 1951, not 1947, even after the movement of peoples that accompanied partition, East Pakistan's population certainly included that higher proportion of Hindus. And if we applied that same proportion to Bangladesh's current population of 165 million, it would equate to 49.5 million Hindus in Bangladesh. For some perspective, it would make Bangladeshi Hindus the 30th largest nation in the world, bigger than every Middle Eastern or North African nation except Egypt, larger than all but 3 of Central and South American countries, and bigger than 24 of 27 countries in the European Union. That's a lot of people. Unfortunately, today's Hindu population of Bangladesh is not 49.5 million. It's, depending on who you believe, it's closer to 12 million, 14 million perhaps. So the question is, what happened to the rest of them? Well, from that 1951 census until until East Pakistan became Bangladesh, the percentage of Hindus dropped from under a third to under a fifth, but the decline did not stop with Pakistan. Bangladeshi leaders like to contrast their country with the one from which they revolted in 1971, but this is at least one area where the contrast is not convincing. For after 30 years of living in Bangladesh, the proportion of Hindus dropped from a fifth to under a tenth. Today, they're about 7 to 8% of the population, or 1 in 15. Now, over the years that I've been doing this, Bangladeshi leaders have tried to get me off this human rights effort by giving me their reasons for why this population decline has nothing to do with human rights. I guess since people in Washington, New Delhi, and Europe buy these silly excuses, they probably figured I would too, but they were wrong. Let me give you some examples. First, there's no problem here in Bangladesh. In fact, there are more Hindus today than there were when Bangladesh became independent in 1971. And that's often coupled with an assertion that if there's a decline in the Hindu proportion, it's due to high Muslim birth rates. Well, to be sure, the raw numbers of Bangladeshi Hindus have increased since 1971. That's true enough. But consider that in 1971, Bangladesh's total population was about 70 million, and it's grown about 2 2/3 that size. Now, in that period, the Muslim population increased by 92 million, or about 2.5 times, pretty close to the national growth rate. But Hindus have increased by a little over 3 million, or only 30%. Are we to believe that this is only a coincidence? Well, fortunately or unfortunately, we do not have to depend on belief because we have data. And by the way, though I said I'm not an academic, my dependence on good analysis and vetting data, I have to attribute to all the years I spent in academia. So let's look at some data. According to Mehtab Karim, a senior research advisor and senior fellow at Pew Forum on Religion and World Affairs, pretty authoritative group, the assumption that Muslim birth rates were high might have been the wisdom in the 1960s and 1970s, but since that time, Bangladeshi Muslim birth rates actually have been falling. Attributing the slow death of Hinduism in Bangladesh to Muslim birth rates is merely an attempt to excuse ethnic cleansing by appearing to bias that's contrary to fact. Beyond that, during the entire period I've mentioned, we've seen an unbroken torrent of anti-Hindu atrocities that continue to this day with the tacit approval of successive Bangladeshi governments. It's that human rights tragedy and not some presumed disparity in birth rates that accounts for the destruction of Hinduism in Bangladesh. Let me go to the next one, I'm told. I've had many Bangladeshi officials react with anger and pretended insult. Their response is to refer to the flowery words in their constitution about equality. But they can't tell me why reality is anything different than what they have in their constitution. This happened to me as recently as earlier this year, just before COVID-19 kept us all in our homes. This official I was speaking with in Dhaka earlier this year told me that he considered opposing my ideas about persecution in Bangladesh as, and I'll quote him, the duties of a patriot. I told him I appreciate his love of country, and I truly do. I even respect it because I'm a patriot myself, and I don't hesitate to stand up for my United States. However, I told him, I expect all patriots to listen to our opponents and adjust our belief if the facts dictate it. Love of country should make us strive to keep improving and developing and know what the things are that we can fix and how to fix them. And that's what I want. That's what I'm doing here. But the most memorable of the incidents I was referring to happened in 2013 with a very loud and public argument I had with then Home Minister of Bangladesh, Dr. Muhyiddin Alamgir. First, the minister tried to patronize me and do nothing, as if I disrupt my life and come all the way around the world merely to sit and have tea with him. Well, when I refused to let him do that, he got very angry and launched into what I call a "who the hell are you" rant. He tried to seize the agenda by taking it and instead criticizing the United States on a range of real and imagined sins, from ethnic cleansing of the Native Americans to mass shootings or even lower union membership. By the way, I asked him, I said, are you seriously equating low union membership with ethnic cleansing? That's the kind of arguments I get. Anyway, he offered nothing but angry accusations. And for that, I thanked him for actually proving my point because he never addressed the matter head on. Finally, just said that, all Bangladeshis live in communal harmony, but that if I come up with any evidence to the contrary, I should just send it to him, and again, I'm quoting him, he would take care of it personally. Well, when he said that, I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. My response to him, and again, I'm quoting because it's important. When he said that to me, I said, wait a minute. You mean to tell me you're the home minister of this country and you're dependent on some guy from Chicago to send you evidence? Anyway, I think you have bigger problems than that. And that night, by the way, after meeting with a Hindu family whose daughter had been abducted with police complicity, I sent him that information. And of course, he never responded. Another one that I love. The number of Hindus have dropped because of voluntary immigration. Well, that's ridiculous. That's like saying a man who runs from a hungry tiger is doing so voluntarily. Oh, yeah, he could have stayed and he chose to run. But he only did so because remaining in place, no matter how much he wanted to remain in place, was filled with imminent danger. And in fact, several years ago, I interviewed a Hindu family in northern Bengal that had fled Bangladesh only 22 days earlier. Their small farm had been invaded, an uncle killed, the father beaten, and the 14-year-old daughter gang raped. Now, no one drove them to the border or physically expelled them. Does that mean they left voluntarily? I think not. Even during the past few months, I've confirmed that influential Bangladeshis with track records of violence have threatened Hindus with death or dire consequences if they didn't leave the country. Again, if they leave, does that mean that they're leaving voluntarily? Well, we can dispose of that argument. And during the past years, I witnessed many of these incidents, both in Dhaka and in the hinterlands of Bangladesh. Police often responded by saying, oh, well, this is not anti-Hindu. It's merely crimes that the majority community faces as well. Well, that was easily dismissed. I would just say, so tell me, Mr. Police Commissioner, when was the last time that Hindus destroyed a mosque or that Hindus forcibly converted Muslims to Hinduism and the government and police did nothing? Of course, in the end, they had to admit it and just told me that is, in fact, what they were told to say to me. But I think the most ridiculous excuse I ever got was from an ambassador, a Bangladeshi ambassador to the United States, who once tried to, in his words, calm me down by saying, oh no, Hindus have no problems in Bangladesh. It's just that they cannot find suitable matches for their children, so they go to India where there are more Hindus. Now, I've been interviewed hundreds of Bangladeshi Hindu refugees in India, and not one told me they left to find marriage partners for their children. But let's also be clear. Bangladeshi officials tried to dismiss my accusations because they assume that we Americans get all our information from the movies and TV, maybe at most a Google search. And look, we know that's not just Bangladeshis. And like every bias, that bias maybe has a kernel of truth. But the problem with biases, of course, is that they take that kernel of truth and generalize them based on their own prejudices. And that's why biases like these didn't hold up. In fact, these particular biases left Bangladeshi officials with no response when I was able to come back to them with solid facts. And I want to mention that in order for me to make an allegation, there have to be at least one of two things. One, that I've seen it myself, or two, that has been confirmed to me by at least two independent eyewitnesses. And I want to emphasize independent. It's very important that people know when I bring forth an allegation that I have really vetted them seriously. But more significantly, for what follows is they threw off these stupid excuses because no one really requires them to do more, and that's a problem. No one requires them to account for what's happening inside their country. Those stupid excuses show more contempt, not just for me, but for governments in New Delhi, Washington, and elsewhere. And the intensity of their anger, however, shows just how frightened they are that the reality might be uncovered. I want to give you some data because we have made some significant progress. But again, there's still much to be done. And every day that we do not take these actions means another Hindu is murdered, another woman or girl is raped, another child is abducted, another temple destroyed, and another day closer to the extinction of Hinduism in East Bengal. So while the litany of atrocities over the years may no longer be unfamiliar, and I consider that one of the pieces of progress we've made, I still urge you to read my 2012 work that was referred to, A Quiet Case of Ethnic Cleansing, where you're going to find a lot of it. Recently, however, I've been gathering attacks on Bangladeshi Hindus and have spent most of this month vetting them in the ways that I told you. Now, my focus was what's happening during Bangladesh's initial lockdown period to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Those are 23 March through 30 May, and I looked at that period. I figured if people would risk infection and possibly death to attack Hindus, they're probably pretty rabid about it. I also figured if Sheikh Hasina's government was going to be passive about it, even during this time when these actions threaten the entire public health, it's also probably committed to letting this happen. So just so you know, I haven't submitted these to Washington yet because I still have some vetting to do. So some of these numbers might change, but let me tell you what I found. I found 77 anti-Hindu incidents during those 69 days, more than a major incident every single day. All of them were specifically anti-Hindu, or they were crimes that were committed against Hindus because the perpetrators knew they were able to do so with impunity. And all of these were incidents in which the government did not take action to save victims or arrest and punish perpetrators. These incidents involved at least 36 assaults, 31 home invasions, 27 acts of vandalism, 22 acts of land grabbing, which I'm assuming people are familiar with, 17 acts of religious desecration, 11 acts of robbery, 8 death threats, eight false arrests, 3 acts of extortion and racketeering, and at least 3 murders, 2 child abductions, 3 forced conversions, at least 4 sexual assaults, and a number of other crimes, along with 3 incidents that I can only describe as anti-Hindu pogroms. And those of you who may not be familiar with the term of pogrom, a pogrom is an organized attack on an entire community with government complicity. All of these events involved unequal protection under the law, something that numerous international jurists have identified as endemic to Bangladesh, and all of these incidents involve perpetrators with arms. Excuse me. So, if this can happen when everyone's supposed to be sheltering in place, imagine what life is like for Hindus in Bangladesh when there are no such restrictions. As I said, once I've completed vetting these incidents, I will be giving this information to key members of the United States Senate and Congress, people I've been working with and discussed already. They're expecting my intervention in some direction on what they can do to use U.S. power to stop these atrocities. So, as I said, there's been some progress, and we can only hope that it stops some incidents. For decades, most of the international community, like Bangladesh itself, was invested in maintaining Bangladesh's brand as a moderate country, democratic and hospitable to minorities. But a couple datas of facts to the contrary tell us otherwise. There have even been some serious concern from a body like the European Parliament that's not known for taking aggressive posture. India's Citizenship Amendment Act, or CAA, was an extremely important and helpful step in recognizing Bangladeshi culpability. Because the CAA include Bangladesh along with Pakistan and Afghanistan as a nation whose minorities need safe haven in India, it represented the first official statement by the Indian government acknowledging that Hindus and other religious minorities are not safe in Bangladesh and that they face human rights abuses sufficient to allow them sanctuary in India. That's extremely important, and it's a great step by India. Now, as someone who's seen these human rights abuses in Bangladesh for 2 decades, I applaud India and the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi for recognizing this important fact and for doing something about it by providing that safe haven where they can be safe. The conversation about this has changed in Washington too. Members of Congress and Senate, administrations from key committees now all recognize the Bangladeshi government complicity in the ethnic cleansing of Hindus there. Many of them have laughed with me when I told them how Bangladeshi officials tried to dismiss these with these silly excuses. And in 2016, a high Bangladeshi official admitted to me, and more importantly, to Congressman Robert Dole, that yes, they do have a problem with anti-Hindu persecution. Significantly, by the way, which gives you an idea of how you approach this meeting took place in an anteroom of the House Committee on Ways and Means, which has authority over pretty much all money, bills, and trade. Two things very, very important to the Bangladeshis. And even though Congressman Dole has now moved on and left Congress, current members of the Ways and Means Committee are also working with me, especially Congressman Brad Schneider, who is in the process of taking the unprecedented step of going from his office in Washington to the Bangladeshi embassy to directly address with them the ethnic cleansing of Hindus, and to do so forcefully. Unfortunately, of course, COVID-19 has delayed that, but it will happen. By the way, just to be clear again, I'm not focusing on the United States because I see myself, or I see us as the new British Raj, God forbid. God forbid. I focus on the United States for three reasons. One, the US has the economic and geopolitical resources to do something about this. Two, the Bangladeshi economy is inordinately dependent on exports to the United States and receipts from UN peacekeeping, of which US taxpayers like myself are the principal funders. And three, the current US foreign policy is perfect for addressing Bangladesh's ethnic cleansing of Hindus. We know the administration of President Donald Trump has not hesitated to use tariffs in its international diplomatic efforts, and the prospect of that has to scare the daylights out of the Bangladeshis. Pardon me. Moreover, despite the assertions of its detractors, there is indeed a unifying foreign policy or Trump doctrine, and a rather effective one with regard specifically to this issue. What it is this: rather than use our military might, this administration has decided to use American economic might and good negotiating skills to project American power and interest without putting young Americans in harm's way or engaging in wars of nation building. We've seen this time and again, most notably with Iran. Venezuela is another example where, despite their oil wealth, U.S. sanctions have really rendered them in a difficult situation. Anyway, there is no reason why this same principle cannot apply to stopping this human rights atrocity in Bangladesh. Now, contrary to everything I've said, I actually have a great deal of affection for the people of Bangladesh. I mean, they're good people. They might have been poorly served by some at times, but I generally find them warm and hospitable and appreciative of others. And, the situation is not as simple as it seems. For instance, some are idiots. I remember one time I landed in Dhaka and was stopped by an officer who recognized my name. And he kept trying to pump me for information and actually detained me at the airport for 2 hours. But I called some people I know in intelligence, and he got slapped on the wrist. So in other words, even though I do face these atrocities, there are people in the government of Bangladesh who want to help end this. So there are some very specific things we can do, but in order to do them effectively, we have to recognize the following principles and always act by them, because I've seen people make mistakes again and again. First, recognize this is a moral quest, We are fighting to save lives. If we do what's convenient to ourselves and abandon the effort, or don't step up for these victims, we're no better than those who carry out the acts. If we know about them and do nothing, we are no less guilty than the perpetrator. And that's something that comes directly from my Jewish Talmud. 2, the Bangladeshi government will not do the right thing simply because it's the right thing to do. Know that, understand that. But it likely will do the right thing if we make it in their interest to do so, or more to the point, making their continued attack on Hindus harmful to their interests. And that's why I talk about economic power. And 3, never exchange actions for words. It's a bad deal. We saw that in Iran. Do not accept promises until you see the action. Words themselves are meaningless. And let's first talk about India. It's the world's largest democracy. There is freedom of expression. I spend 1 to 3 months in India every year, and I've done so for the past 13 years, and I observed that most restrictions on free speech are restrictions that people put on themselves. Perhaps they're afraid of being thought impolite or offending someone. I don't know. But there is no reason why there cannot be a grassroots groundswell protesting something that's happening next door. Next door. I've also been told by several highly placed Bangladeshis that their nation's leadership does know about the persecution of Hindus and has deliberately taken a hands-off approach to it. But every one of those influential people also told me that Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who's effectively Bangladesh's strongwoman, is adamant in maintaining that stance. And they've told me one major reason is India's silence, and that until something comes from India, she will not allow anything to change. Every Indian must raise his voice. By the way, notice I didn't say Hindus, I said every Indian, because this is something all of us should be concerned about. Every Indian should raise their voice and tell their elected leaders, as we do here in the United States, that they will not rest until those leaders actually do something about it, and they certainly have the ability to do so. I mean, look, remember what happened some years back with the publication of the cartoons with the depictions of the Prophet Muhammad? Caused such outrage in the Muslim world. When that happened, at least 15 Muslim majority nations felt beholden enough to issue formal protests to the nation of Denmark. Not to the newspaper, not to the journalists, but to the nation of Denmark. Bangladesh lodged a formal diplomatic protest in Denmark. Pakistan's ambassador urged Denmark punish the cartoonists, very, very much in keeping with Pakistan. Iran, with never a nation be rational, recalled its ambassador and blamed it all, I love this, on a Zionist conspiracy. When will India stand up for persecuted Hindus? By the way, you know, when I first started this, many self-styled Hindu nationalist groups, who remain nameless, told me not to bother. Oh, he said, nobody cares about it or will ever care about it. I see my time is not very great, so I want to try and get everything in here. My wheelhouse is the United States.
Continue, sir. Not an issue. You can continue.
Oh, thank you. Okay, very good. So the United States is where I really practice my action. And the United States, like every other democratic country in that country, our political leaders are always going to have an eye on what the electorate is demanding, on how many people care about an issue and care enough about an issue to make it important how they vote. Now, my country has taken action on human rights issues before without regard to whether or not it was in our material interests. We led the international effort to save Bosnian Muslims in the 1990s. And though it was done under NATO, the reality is that it doesn't happen without U.S. leadership or Americans being the major military force. And actually, the U.S. senator who got me started in human rights was a pilot in that war. Early in this century, we know that the United States provided similar leadership on Darfur, and it was part of the multinational force that intervened. In these and other cases, it also issued very strong statements, took diplomatic action, and funded the action of others. I've become a rather familiar face in Washington as I continue pressing the case that this is something my nation has done before and we have an obligation to continue. And I think we're particularly well suited for a lead role in this case. Bangladeshis are rightly proud of their country's economic miracle. And every day that I followed it and learned about it was something that warmed my heart as well. But that entire economic miracle, and we're sort of seeing part of it now with COVID-19, all of that could come crashing down in an instant if we all get serious about stopping the human rights atrocity being carried out against Bangladeshi Hindus. As I mentioned earlier, the Bangladeshi economy is inordinately dependent on its exports, particularly of ready-made garments. And who's their biggest customer? The United States. So what would happen if President Trump imposed tariffs on Bangladeshi goods, making them more expensive in a very competitive market. As someone who spent decades working in the US corporate world, I can tell you what will happen. Their customers are going to find more reasonable sellers. And no matter what Bangladesh tries to do later, make up for it, they will never get back that market share that someone else has grabbed from them. Add to that the fact that I've talked with some important US corporations, and they're pretty shy. They don't want to about being known as a company that's guilty of complicity and ethnic cleansing. So look for that as well. In other words, besides the political path, there's an economic corporate path that we have to take. Like the Bangladeshi economy has been hit hard by COVID-19. We've seen this. And like China's economy, the Bangladeshi economy does not control its own destiny. It's dependent on consumer habits halfway around the world, which is why it's suffering right now. Those consumers have not been spending the money they're spending in the past. Moreover, structural changes to the US job scene has more people working at home, which means, and I can tell you this myself, less need to go out and buy new clothes. So Bangladesh is going to be facing more challenges once this crisis passes. And it has a choice. It can act to do something about it, prevent the challenge, or it can watch as the people of its country suffer an economic depression. And we've had a congressional briefing about this, as a matter of fact. So again, people are pretty aware of it. Now, excuse me, that's my time. I want to leave you with an example of how this stuff gets done. If you were in the United States during the 1970s or 1980s, I guarantee you that you could not pass a synagogue, a Jewish house of worship, without seeing a huge banner that read, "Save Soviet Jews." The American Jewish community saw the suffering of our co-religionists in the Soviet Union. And we knew that if we didn't do something about it, no one would. And they'd continue to suffer. And we just couldn't sit with that. So our entire community acted. You could see average American citizens spending their money to travel to the Soviet Union and smuggle in religious books and artifacts to let our Jewish brothers and sisters know that they were not alone and people were working with them. Former President Ronald Reagan has said this was definitely an important element in his predecessor's boycott of the 1980 Olympics in the Soviet Union. And Reagan himself would bring up this issue every time he sat down to talk with the Soviets. We did not stop. We knew that in order for it to be successful, we had to get other religious community involved. In other words, it could not be seen as something that was just important to Jews. This was a moral effort that was important to all people. And we got other religious groups to lobby their members of Congress, their senators, as we did. And it worked, because in the end, we saved 1.2 million Jews from that communist hellhole. And many of them continue to immigrate to our country. So there are many things that the Bangladeshi government has to do. The key to all of them is that they have made a religion out of unequal application of their law to various groups. And that's something that international jurists have commented on and said need to change. And it's something that was strongly emphasized during this recent congressional briefing. It's something that Sheikh Hasina has to guarantee equality under the law for all Bangladeshis if she wants to neutralize the growing sentiment against the current Bangladeshi actions. Now, that means when crimes are not prosecuted, they have to make sure that they get prosecuted. They have to discipline those officials that don't prosecute them. They have to prosecute and punish any Bangladeshi officials or police that are involved in these actions, and I can tell you there are some. They have to not just talk about equal protection under the law, they have to enforce it. Well, will they do it, or will they continue with their blanket denial? So far, Sheikh Hasina seems stuck on the latter. We can make her decide to do the right thing by remaining strong in our communications with our governments. And by doing that together, we can save Hindus and Hinduism in Bangladesh. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for your wonderful and a brave one. I must tell you that it's a brave one, brave presentation. Even though I have not, I'm not watching any sort of, any question here coming up. Maybe it's coming up, but I have got a question.
Yes.
Now, what may be the solution? You are telling that the U.S. government can put sanctions on their exports and all that, Bangladeshi exports and all that. But I feel that the problem is much more, inherent in the sense that if the general people is not tolerant, if the general Bangladeshi people are not tolerant towards the Hindus, then how can it, solve the problem? It's a big issue, sir.
That's a great question, Dr. Sen. And I must tell you that if, in fact, we believe in our heart of hearts that Hindus will never be free in Bangladesh, then the only solution, and it's not one that I recommend, is for all of them to immigrate, which, of course, is what the ethnic cleansers want. And as I said, that's why I would not comply with that. I will say this. You are correct in that the people who carry out the incidents that I observe are not big influential people. They might be paid by influential people, but they're common average citizens. I do think, however, that most of them act out of personal interest, a sense that maybe they can profit by this, but be that as it may. I've met many Bangladeshi Muslims who want to end this. They feel it's a blot on their country. And actually, as I am traveling through Bangladesh, even in some pretty nasty areas, I am almost always accompanied by Bangladeshi Muslims who are putting their lives and safety in jeopardy in order to stand up for Hindus. That's why, by the way, when people say, oh, this is just a communal thing you're doing, Dr. Bankin, I have plenty of examples to show them why this is a human thing, not a communal thing. By the way, I also have Bengali Muslims with me many times as I travel through West Bengal, fighting the same kind of bigotry. So I think you have a good point that if it's that bad, then I don't know if there is a solution. Then maybe partition was the only solution. Again, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think if we stand strong and say, look, you're not going to kick us out of our own land, then it will probably be a process by which more and more average people can just get used to living in peace with their neighbors. It can be done, but it's sort of like the same thing that's happening in the Middle East. We know that the Middle East problem, one of the major reasons why the Middle Eastern conflict is not solved, is the instigation of hate among the Palestinians. I see the books and the TV shows regularly, and they instigate hatred. They don't say, let's live together peaceably, get rid of those Jews. Same thing in Bangladesh. And I think there are plenty places we can start once we get the actual actions done by the government. There are plenty of places we can go to have that happen.
Okay, thank you, sir. Now, one question that I can see from Muhammad Asif is asking you, sir, don't you think the racial tensions in African nations and religious conflicts in South Asian nations, the reason lies in the within colonial past and the idea of nation and nationalism itself? What is your take on that?
Okay, with all due respect to the questioner, that's sort of like an excuse people go to by saying, oh, it's not my fault. It's the colonial, it's the British Raj. Listen, if you believe that that conflict you refer to between religions, between tribes, that tribalism, between nations, if you believe tribalism only existed because of the British Raj, you're sadly mistaken. To be sure, the British Raj utilized that conflict, that whole divide and conquer mentality, which is so destructive to the places that they occupy. But they did not cause it. They did not cause it. You can no longer expect to solve problems by blaming them on someone else. By the way, that's one reason why I feel very good about being Jewish. When we have a problem, our response is not pointing elsewhere and saying it's your fault, your fault, your fault, your fault. It's what did we do to contribute to that problem? That's where you have to begin. And that's where you have to begin here.
So what about, I want to, bring one comparison to that. So what about this Black Lives Matter right now, which is, going on in your, place of America? I mean, see, no religion basically teaches anybody to hate somebody. No religion, absolutely no, not Hinduism, not Muslims, not the Christianity, nothing. But how come this sort of hatred is so prominent in Southeast Asia, particularly in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, and even in some parts of India as well? Why is so like that? What is your take on that? Does religion have any sort of um, uh, any sort of contradictory sense in that?
Okay, thank you again, Dr. Sam. Let me break this down in a few. Let me first address the Black Lives Matter issue in the United States. I may not agree with all the positions that people marching in the streets hold. However, isn't this exactly what we're talking about? Yes, like I said, I'm a patriot. My country, I love my country. Do we have room to grow and improve? Of course, we always do. That's baked into our DNA. And so there's a serious issue. But people are addressing it at a grassroots level, and their First Amendment rights to free speech, to freedom of assembly, are being protected. And my sense of things is that when we're on the other side of this, there will be some structural changes. Do I think all the problems will be solved? No, just as I don't think all the problems were solved in the 1960s, 1970s civil rights movement. But we have that ability. And if we had the time, I'd get into the weeds of exactly how that worked. It is baked into our Constitution. That's with regard to Black Lives Matter. Now, with regard to religions, yes, I agree with you. Religions don't teach anyone to hate, but many of the people involved in religions do. And I'm not calling out any one religion in particular. That just happens to be an example. When I look at the three Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, it's not that I believe that, oh, we Jews, we're just so much better than the rest. I do not believe that at all. But what I can tell you is Christianity started going off the rails, started becoming a problem when it wedded itself to Roman culture and then to the medieval culture of Europe. Islam started going off the rails by wedding itself to Arab culture. The religions themselves all tend to speak the same language. There might be some differences here and there, but I think, well, my own perspective, and I always think of Hinduism when I think of this, because Hinduism has been a great teacher for me as well. But I believe in a God that's great enough to give his children, and that's all of us, many different paths to come to God. And that a great God would never tell us you must only go on one path. So again, religion themselves, not a problem. People with interests, definitely a problem. Cultural interests, money interests. But again, I used this word before. It all comes down to tribalism. So to sum up, in my book, What is Moderate Islam? I had many Muslims who were part of that book. And one of them, who actually not long ago is a Pashtun who was picked up by the ISI, and we're still trying to get him out. But he mentioned being raised in a small village in northwest Pakistan. He mentioned that the problem for Muslims is that he was taught, and his fellows were taught from day one, that their first loyalty, their primary reference, was not any nation state, was not any interreligious group of peoples. It was a international Muslim ummah. Now, whether that just referred to him, I'm not going to generalize that, but I will say I've heard that before. In other words, when we get to the point where we can effectively counter the education, religious education that people are getting, we'll do a lot better. But again, religions themselves, not there. And I've read all the holy books, just not there. But people do create the problems.
Okay, thank you very much, sir, for your wonderful answers. And it is pretty bold what you are talking with all the statistics about the ethnic cleansing. Some facts are really, what to say, these are hard to digest, really hard to digest. And but keep on your good work, sir, and hopefully your book will be throwing a lot of light to the present government in India, in Pakistan, as well as in Bangladesh, wherever these sort of nefarious activities are going on in the name of keeping their religion alive and kicking. This all will go away. That much we can pray. That much we can do. And people like you who are raising their voices, they are actually the torch bearers of this mission. And hopefully, from this webinar where you have come, lots of listeners are there who will be hearing this thing, and they will be motivated to do something like you. Thank you very much, sir, for coming, and wish you a very good health, and take good care about yourself. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much.
Okay, after we had heard Dr. Richard Benkin, who has written a wonderful book on ethnic cleansing, and that is available in Amazon also. Sir has told us we'll be giving you the names on this platform. Now here we come to the end of this session. Our technical sessions are over. For the last 3 days, we had speakers from Bangladesh, then we had from Poland, from Pakistan, from our own India, and from United States of America as well. So we are coming to the end of this, and from now on, it would be a valedictory session. And there, the Teachers Council Secretary of our college, Netaji Subhas Mahavidyalaya, Dr. Samit Diabak, will be here, and he will be addressing you all. And I thank you all the participants that you have, shown tremendous enthusiasm on this platform, and you have, wanted to ask so many questions, and those have been answered by our honorable speakers also. And I must thank the inaugural session, our honorable higher education minister, he was there, our honorable vice chancellor was there, and the director of this higher education department in our state of Tripura. I give them, I'm really, grateful to them for their unstinted support and their wonderful cooperation. Thank you all. I have been the organizing secretary of this international webinar. Hopefully you have enjoyed it, and you have learned a lot, because I myself have, taken a lot from this. So over to you, Dr. Samit Diabak, who is Secretary of Teachers Council, Netaji Subhas Mahavidyalaya. Over to you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Suresh sir. Good evening to all of you. Myself, Dr. Samit Kumar Diabak, Secretary Teachers Council, Netaji Subhas Mahavidyalaya, wholeheartedly congratulates the organizing committee of international webinar on United by Pens, Divided by Fence, Perspectives on Partition Literature. For 3 days, I was attending this webinar and I consider myself very fortunate enough to listen to some of the stalwarts of English literature around the globe. Partition is a very sensitive issue. The renowned scholars have pointed out varied perspectives on it. Professors from Bangladesh, Pakistan, Poland, USA, and India have deliberated their insights on this platform, and a large number of participants have interacted with them on various issues. It has been an extremely enriching webinar in the truest sense of the term. I hope all participants must have enjoyed a lot while attending this seminar. Being the Secretary Teachers Council, I must pay my deepest gratitude to our Honorable Education Minister of the state, Sri Ratanlal Nath ji, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Tripura University, Professor M.K. Singh ji, and our dynamic director, sir, Sri Saju Bhai, IS. It is simply overwhelming to find unflinching support from every corner to organize this seminar. Our principal in charge, Madam Dr. Rita Das Naik, has stood by us like a pillar, and her presence is always an inspiration for us. The whole committee, Directorate of Higher Education, have worked round the clock to make this webinar a huge success. I offer my profoundest appreciation for their sincere efforts. I hope that our college will engage in such academic exercise in the days to come. Thank you once again. Thank you all. Thank you. Now over to Suji sir.
Unmute.
Thank you very much, sir, for your kind and inspirational words. It has been nice. You have been always beside us in these days, and that is truly phenomenal. Phenomenal. Now, uh, somebody worked, day and night for this international webinar because it's a very rare thing to happen in our state of Tripura. And if I'm not mistaken, that it is first of its kind in our state of Tripura that the Department of English has organized an international webinar, and that too truly international, not taking one, foreign country. We have had views from different sort of countries and from different universities, magnificent scholars and very erudite sort of academicians and professors. They have joined as participants. So I myself, as organizing secretary of this international webinar, I take a lot of pride that we have been able to organize such a interesting and fantastic seminar. And somebody who has worked day and night, she has been my colleague, Mrs. Patriot de Burma. She is my colleague, and I'm very happy. I'm really happy and glad that I have got such a, such a cooperating, such a smiling lady, and such a genial spirit by my side all the time. And she is Mrs. Patriot de Burma, assistant professor of Department of English, Netaji Subhas Mahavidyalaya. She has worked tremendously, and no thanks is enough for her from my part. So I would like to call it a day right now with the speech of Mrs. Patriot de Burma, and she'll be putting the curtains on this international webinar, which has been a beautiful experience for all of us, I believe. Over to you, Patriot. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I take the cue from here, and instead of pondering or instead of keeping myself to some more words of gratitude to all the participants and resource persons who have, in fact, ornamented our academic discussion through their participation and full support towards making this 3 days international webinar a success. I would like to start first with the inaugural session, wherein the organizers of Netaji Subhas Mahavidyalaya, especially the Department of English of Netaji Subhas Mahavidyalaya, Udaipur, Gomati district, Tripura, would like to, would like to offer our words of gratitude, our warm expression of appreciation for all those who have been involved with us throughout this webinar, and without whose presence this webinar would not have been a huge success. Of course, I cannot neglect the technical glitches that we had to experience during this 3 days, because weather and nature is something over which we have never been able to control. And with the onset of the pandemic, of course, it has again limited ourselves to our homes, within which we have to always restrict ourselves in order to build any kind of relationship, or in order to find any way of outletting our vent or our expression towards any academic or any collaborations with our counterparts. Now, we are very much pleased, we are very much glad that all the 3 days of the webinar had been with the full support of the support of our principal, Madam Dr. Rita Das Nayak, who had always been supportive in the webinar, who has always been a presence with all of us, with the organizing committee, as well as who has given her expert inputs and advice on how to make this webinar even more fruitful. We also show, we also give thanks to our Honorable Minister for Higher Education, Sri Ratan Lal Nath, who has kindly consented to address our webinar. We are also grateful towards Professor M.K. Singh, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Tripura University, who has also taken time out of his busy schedule to help us and to support us by addressing this webinar. We thank Sri Saju Wahid A, the Director of Higher Education, without whose support and without whose guidance and benevolent, generous act of kindness towards providing us with technical support and space for help for holding our webinar without any network connectivity issues. We are really grateful to Sir for helping us with all this, for furnishing us with all the equipments necessary for this webinar. We are also thankful to all the resource persons who have been very gracious enough to accept our invitation, first of all, to be a part of this webinar, and then by sharing the knowledge through this webinar, by which all of us have benefited and had a very enriching and enlightening experience. I hope this webinar and its subsequent discussions and knowledge would definitely be disseminated throughout the world, and this would be something that we would live up to and which would remain in our hearts even after this webinar is over. We are also thankful to all the participants who have been glued to our channel, to this platform, from the first day onwards till the last, and without whose presence this webinar would not have been a successful one. And definitely, as I look over the chat box, I can find that there are many suggestions, or there are many comments which are coming regarding the organization of this webinar. Well, we are really happy that this 3 days webinar has at last come to an end successfully, and the feedback form will definitely be shared just after I finish my address. Thank you very much, Ekta. Definitely, I have tried to address to all the people who have been involved in making this webinar a success. And now, with these few words, I would like to conclude this webinar to an end. Thank you all.
Certificate.
Uh, I would like to inform all the participants that the certificate of participation will be provided to all of you within 15 days. And all those of you who have not submitted the feedback form yet, kindly do it. It will be shared in the various social platforms like WhatsApp, Telegram, and of course here in YouTube channel too. And Therefore, I request all of you to kindly fill up the feedback forms without no wrong entries, so that it would be able, it would enable us to issue an errorless certificate. And kindly make your entries in running letters. It should not be in capital letters because, well, that does not look good on a certificate. And the certificates will be delivered to your email address. Therefore, if you have any issues, any information regarding the webinar, regarding your certificates, you may always refer to the Telegram group chat. Thank you all. And with that, we have come to the end of this 3 days international webinar on United by Pens, Divided by Fens, Perspectives on Partition Literature, organized by the Department of English, Netaji Subhas Mahavidyalaya, Udaipur, Gomati, Tripura. So from Dr. Shurajit Sen, the organizing secretary, and me, Patriot the Burma, and all of us NSM family here at Tripura, we would like to say goodbye, stay happy, stay healthy till we meet another time. Thank you.